And we call this meeting to order. Everybody please rise and join me with the pledge to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everybody. As per requirement, notice is hereby given that this is a regular meeting of the Borough of Highlands Land Use Board, and all requirements have been met. Notice has been transmitted to the Asbury Park Press and the River Times. Notice has been posted on the public bulletin board. All action will be taken. Roll call.
Mayor Beyond,
Here.
Chief Burton,
Here.
Mr. Kutosh,
Here.
Ms. LaRussa, Mr. Lee,
Here.
Councilman Mazzola, Ms. Tierney, Mr. Montecalvo, Ms. Nash, Ms. Pendleton, Ms. Walsh, Vice Chairman Knox,
Here.
Chairman Stockton.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we do have our form. Next on the agenda, or first on the agenda, is to open the meeting to the public for any general comments or questions that the public may have with regard to what it is that we do open land use board. Next thing you know, we'll move on. And we are going to take things out of order a little bit here, but we'll see what happens. First on our agenda under resolutions is LUD 2020-05. That's for the project at 193 to 195 Bay Avenue. It was the Signal minor subdivision, and in the packets, we do have a copy of that resolution. Anybody have any comments or questions or items to discuss now the time? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve. All for that? All right. I'll second it. Okay.
Is that Mr. Kutosh? Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? Roll call.
Chairman Knox,
Yes.
Mayor Beyond,
Yes.
Mr. Kutosh,
Yes.
Mr. Lee,
Yes.
Ms. Tierney, Chairman Stockton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay. So we're going to hold off just for a moment on the Kia application, so the 2019-04, and we're going to jump down to hearings on new business for an announcement with regard to LUB 2019. It's a project at 210 Bay Avenue, lot 64, lots 24 and 25. That's the application for the fund. Is the applicant, and that's
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, the applicant missed one of the wonderful property owners' mistake and spoken about it after viewing it. And we take jurisdiction and move on. I said yes, as long as you serve Mr. Casey with the notice. For the next meeting. So we've done that. He's provided proof and video of service on Mr. AP, missing one for the next meeting. And he also provided to Michelle with the publication, that notice, the notice of the property owners, and the property owner service. All of that is in order. So basically, as we see it, everybody can notice because it's tonight and one person's case for next month. So it's my judgment for the jurisdiction to proceed. My recommendation would be to take jurisdiction and schedule this matter for the December legislative meeting.
okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments with regard to that? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to do exactly that. We'll take jurisdiction of this application and then adjourn it to our December 3rd land use board meeting.
I like it.
Okay? Okay. Any discussion on that motion? Roll call.
Chairman Knox,
Abstain from votes.
Chief Burton,
I'm going to abstain.
Mr. Kutosh,
Yes.
Mr. Lee,
Yes.
Ms. Terry,
Yes.
Ms. Nash,
Yes.
Ms. Pendleton,
Yes.
Chairman Stockton.
I'm gonna vote yes. Fairly certain that I'm not next, under actions on other business, in your packets, you do have a resolution that was sent over to us. It's resolution 20-225 from mayor and council with regard to listing certain lots and blocks in the town that the council would like us to study as being an area in need of redevelopment. And just wanted to discuss that briefly with the board as to what our procedures are going to be with regard to that.
Well, my recommendation, I think, maybe you can at the same time, I'm not trying to call, this is not something you can hit on, and it was right. I don't know what the, got the impression from the wording of the resolution of the council, how did that, done that, the other plan, yours?
Yes, sir. That was not forwarded to you, to the transmitted to you as well, along with this recommendation.
No, that was great. So,
I was looking at it, I didn't get copies.
so we, well then, okay, let me ask this, did you report this, information or the recommendation?
In the recommendation for particular lots and blocks.
Okay. So, well, rather than me get the wheel, I think, first of all, we would need that report, everybody. And probably have that person, and could come to our meeting, and, you know, discuss it, right back to the governing body of ordinance. You had to guess now. Is that something you think is likely going to be time consuming in the board level?
I think it will be more time consuming at the planners level. There's a great deal of information, as you know, from a regular area redevelopment. There are a great many lots and blocks listed here. I believe it's from Veterans Park to Atlantic Street on both sides of the avenue. There are a few newer buildings that are being left out of this, but there are still, as you can see, a great deal of properties in there. What I will do is I will get the planner, Mr. Paul Bradley. I'll get Paul Bradley, Grydiel, with Phillips Creek. I will get his report, and I will send that over to Michelle, so she can distribute to everyone. He also has to do a lot of other background information. No, not at this point, because he still needs to get from the borough, construction documents, police reports, code enforcement reports on all of these properties, so that's going to be a heavy lift. Compiling all of that.
Those are doing flat.
Correct. But I can get you his preliminary report,
Okay.
easily, probably about 2, 3, or 4 pages, something like that. And it just shows an outline on the avenue where these properties are.
And then, it sounds to me like it's work that the planner has to do for a while, and he might not be ready to come in December, so maybe kind of target him for January or February.
I can have a call with him tomorrow and see where.
What his schedule will be, and we'll accommodate ours to do that.
Exactly.
Is there any time frame that we have to pay attention to with addressing this resolution, or can we?
Doesn't say.
It doesn't say it.
One more time until it's ready for the presentation?
What I'll do is, as I said, I'll call the planner tomorrow. I'll work with Michelle tomorrow, so at least that initial documentation can be circulated amongst the board. And then any other information that I get from the planner, I'll also show it to Michelle, so that could be an email that goes out. And everyone can get that information on.
We'll start studying it and getting ready for the presentation.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it may be the type of thing that we do more than anything for the questions is faster. I don't know how it's going to flow. That's not possible to make the pieces, but we'll have to play that part by ear. And then, of course, in terms of figure out how to schedule, so try and get in part of the basis, of course.
Exactly. So we don't need to act on any resolution right now. Okay. And then next on our agenda would be approval of the minutes, and in the packets you do have the minutes from the October 1st meeting. And if anybody has any comments, additions or corrections, you have time to get those up. Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Any discussion on that, Melissa?
Chairman Knox,
Yes.
Mayor Brion,
I stand.
Chief Burton,
Yes.
Mr. Kutosh,
Yes.
Mr. Lee,
Yes.
Ms. Jerry,
Yes.
Ms. Pendleton,
Yes.
Chairman Stockton,
Yes.
motion carries.
Those minutes are approved, and, next are, under communications and vouchers. Michelle and I took, already took the time to review and, endorse those, vouchers from P&L and from, Mr. Baxter, so that part is already taken care of. So now we'll jump back to the other items, hearings on old business. That's LUB 2019-04. That's for Kia Inc. and their new finance application, continuation of the hearing for the property at 95 to 99 Bay Avenue. That's block 41, lot 13.01. So the record, I'm going to step down because I'm halfway through that. And turn over the gavel to Rose County.
And
So the record, I'm also setting out.
yes, mayor's also put it out, so, and I don't believe anybody else is going to put it out. Okay, just to, reset the table, we heard from, a presentation last month, Dave, the owner, and then of course both of the personnel to my engineer. And we did get questions of the two witnesses by under the public. That having been said, we're going to see it again because the applicant told him the result of the told two things. Number one is we're only going to give it down to half tonight because one of the other days already it's not. Now we've got the whole night. And secondly, if we reach a point where there more people come and we have over 25 people that want to be present, the other hearing we will adjourn at that point. So far it looks like we're pretty shaky tonight. So, Jim?
Okay. Welcome tonight, back to the board. I guess let's give us a quick overview of what you guys are looking to do.
Sure. We have this property that, from our perspective, is a unique property. It's bounded on three sides by streets, which creates opportunities to do things aesthetically, as then also with respect to access that we might not otherwise be able to do in a location like this. It is, and we'll be looking at master plan, we've looked at the re-examination report in 2009, I think as I mentioned last time. I own the property at 182 Bay Avenue for 20 years, my business, second law office. So I'm familiar with the corridor and, we're familiar with, having reviewed all this,
the challenges associated with this particular section that my client's property was in. So we have attempted to come up with a design and a use that works there. We think regardless of the zoning for that particular property. We did hear from Mr. Fremont last time. He's walking back again because last time, whatever reason, the stormwater report hadn't made its way to the board. So he's back to answer any questions with this stormwater report. He also has a diagram that shows potential car clustering market, or luncheon market, sorry, but I expect his testimony to be brief. But, I mean, I think what the board is really has to consider is, yes, this is a use that is not allowed in the zone, but there has been, it's been a challenging zone to make work over the years. The property's been vacant a long time. The property across the street has been vacant a long time. It's just a tough spot to make work. There was thought, I think, in the original zone plan, in the master plan, that this was going to be a niche retail area, potentially, with some mixed uses. I don't want to say it hasn't worked, but it's still evolved. And we think that a strong, very well done, very well appointed residential townhouse, something like this, that can be situated and designed in a certain way, as I mentioned, because of the streets, is an anchor presence, really, that works regardless of what may happen eventually around it. It would be nice to have a nice looking, well-built, attractive, residential use to it that can then be used to start to maybe try to do some of the things that the use in the zone is originally intended to do. So, and of course, you're always confronted with the flood issues and constraints that 11-foot DSC puts on trying to make the property work. So we've been given all that. We kind of take all those challenges and come up with this particular project that we can deal with those challenges in a very aesthetically pleasing, useful way that we could benefit the town. And Mr. Roberts, our planner, I think, probably going to be the longest witness tonight because he can really focus in on that. We also have Brian Berguskus, who's our architect, to go through the design rules. We did not hear from him last time. Mr. McKay, Charlie McKay, who's the owner of Chia, is here again. Can answer any questions if there were any about his intention. So, with that said, I think we're going to start with Mr. Bishop. Well, any questions? I wanted to ask Mr. Baxter, just, I left off my notes with A9 is the last one?
No, we have an A10.
A10.
It was a large render, that was a wood, I think. Large render. Proposed building that you can say, yeah, maybe it's that one. Oh, I don't know. Did you mark it?
This is not,
I saw the color last time. I propose the property.
okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Is this one?
I remember.
Good. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. The architectural design, which was marked last time, was A6. Has been updated. So if it's okay, I'm just going to put a marking on that and say 11. Before we go any further, we need to notify what zoning we need looking for. I'm sorry. What zoning we need looking for? Is the use variance? Is there any? Oh yes, yeah. Okay, we're looking for the site preliminary and final site plan approval. We need a use variance, which is the primary variance that we need to meet from. There's a number of bulk variances potentially. It's a little confusing because we're in the CBD zone, which is actually easier for us in terms of the bulk variances that are needed. But I think the engineer, Mr. Herman, has also laid out what are the multifamily use zoning requirements. So we believe that given where the property is and how it's been designed, that the CBD bulk requirements are probably more appropriate to what we're doing. But Primarily, of course, we need to use parents. Thank you. Okay.
So let me share in Mr. Virgin. Am I pronouncing it right? Presented? Presented. I'm sorry. So it's B-E-R, instead of B-R-A?
Yep. ER.
It's pronounced B-R-A.
Sir.
Okay, one raise your hand, please, sir. First, everyone, give you what is named, and you all the number.
Yes, I do.
Want to state your name, spell your last name, and give your address, please.
Brian Brzezinskis, BERZINSKIS. I'm a registered architect in the state of New Jersey, owner of Verasa Design Group, located at 231 Highway 71 in Manasquan, Missouri.
Yes, you accept your application.
Thank you very much.
You need some, I don't know how.
How's everybody here?
We can hear you.
I'll have you this way.
Is it picked up on the?
It is. Yep, we can hear you.
You've got some documents here, why don't you just tell the board exactly what we prepared? We'll get into it.
All right, so the first drawing A1 that we talked about just being slightly updated from the previous version, I just want to go, A11, sorry, there was updated from the previous version. I just want to do a quick walkthrough first of what we have to look at here, and then also what the quick updates were. So starting out,
This is A6 modification.
yes, A6 with modifications, now A11.
Based upon some of the comments.
Correct.
No, we did it.
No, we didn't submit a copy of it, but we only had really 2 modifications, so I think pretty easily explain what exactly those are.
Okay.
So, starting with one of the modifications, and starting with the ground floor plan, is basically, like we spoke earlier, this isn't a flood zone, so you can only use that ground floor for vehicular parking, storage, and access up into the building. One of those modifications that we spoke about and previously submitted is I just threw in a diagram on here illustrating 2 vehicles in the garage. I understand that this might not traditionally be considered part of that parking requirement, but with the fact that we have a driveway in front of every garage, we would be parking in front to back anyway. So anybody who was in the garage and somebody else who was in the driveway would require that original spot to pull out of the driveway in order for the other car to get back.
Does the parking, I can't see. Does the parking, if you're going in side by side?
No, it is too deep. Yeah. So with that being said, considering that if there's a driveway parking spot in front of the garage, there could be potentially, with the depth of the way that the garage is, 2 cars located deep. And then they would have to pull out, one by one in order to exit.
Hey, can you see this? Not a modification.
Yeah. So then,
Everything remains the same though.
yes, everything remains the same except the drawing of 2 cars. The dimensions of the foundation are identical. I just illustrated 2 cars to help depict the concept of parking front to back. The depth of the garage is identical.
Can you tell us the depth just for the board?
The depth is 36 feet. So that would be 2 18-foot deep parking spaces.
That'd be pretty tight, so.
18 foot would be the typical parking spot.
60 to 18, could theoretically be done up on the state.
If it's 2 larger vehicles, then yes, but like mine, I drive a sedan, it's 15.
And your original one that we have here didn't show a wall or anything like that.
No wall, you can't utilize the spaces. Yeah, this really is only supposed to be used for storage. It's not a habitable space in the plan because it is located in the flood zone. It is just a parking garage for storage. So then onward and upward, we go with the
There's a first floor plan illustrating a potential layout for one of the units, which obviously would be repetitive amongst the others. This just illustrates general living space, and including a half bath, while the second floor illustrates the 3 bedrooms that also have 2 bathrooms up there, one as being a master and a laundry. And then going upward is a walk-up attic with a little balcony space off of the walls. The second addition that we were commenting on with the update of A11 is per earlier commentary at the previous meeting with regards to the air conditioning unit location and how we had them on the side of the building. We took some and heard some advice and used that to revise slightly in order to accommodate air conditioning units up on the rooftop area of the building. We just sectioned out little alcoves near our exterior balconies so we could bring those units all up to the 3rd floor and then to the roof and basically hide them from a real visible sight from any perspective down the ground.
Is that for all units?
That would be for every unit.
I believe you specified that it would be all on one side of the building.
Correct. Originally, the original plan, there was testimony from the engineer, was regarding the idea that we would locate all of the units on a raised platform on the one side of the property, which would have been adjacent to the neighbor.
That would be all on individual.
All of them would be at their individual units, up on the rooftop adjacent to the balcony for service, while at the same time obviously being out of sight of any of the adjacent property owners and any of the pedestrians. So then, that's pretty much the quick summary of the floor plans and just on the exterior and elevations. We did have a exhibit A10, which is just a colorized version of the one side of the project that faces along the streetscape. That does include entrances down into the lower level, the ground floor. That would be access then up to the building. And on the opposite side, I don't know if we included this as part of A10 or we could mark it separately, is the opposite side of the building, which is facing the internal driveway that shows the individual driveway spaces, as well as the access up to the porches that are located on the project.
But do you want that side, A and A?
A10A.
Or you just want to start?
So then just a brief explanation and walkthrough. Obviously, aesthetically, we're looking for something that's cohesive, while at the same time individually identifying that these are multiple units. So we've gone with a selection of products that vary between a shake style siding and a clapboard style siding with a little variation in color in order to differentiate these as individual units as they should, while at the same time obviously keeping in mind that a lot of the finishes that we're choosing with those materials for siding, as well as some roofing materials and accent pieces, are designed to be of a higher end finish so that aesthetically the interior and exterior of the building are looking for a certain type of clientele to actually inhabit the space. Otherwise, for the most part, this does have access from the ground floor as well as, like I mentioned earlier, entry through the driveway that goes to the interior, and then the interior ground floor also has stairway access up to the first floor and the rest of the building.
If the board have any questions?
So if you can turn that around between lines, so that this is the front of the building, right?
This is a streetscape.
Right, so now the air conditioners are going to be outside of the front of the building?
They would be, so up on this upper level is the area that we have these balconies.
Little balconies.
There would be an area that would be cut out in the roof line that would be adjacent to the balcony. So when you look up from the street, you'll still see roof line, and then there'll just be a hole of that roof that's cut out so that the air conditioning unit could breathe. But you wouldn't actually, if you're standing on the curb here, because of the perspective of the building, you're not really going to actually even see the unit. And any areas where the roof line, when we cut the hole out for the space around the unit for maintenance, would require some type of a screening mechanism just to protect whoever's maintaining the unit. So in essence, the screening material, whatever we use around it, if there even needs to be any, would protect it from any type of view and would just exhaust the air up to the vertically.
And then, if I may, the second question I have is, on the schematic where you added the 2 cars in under the house, how realistic do you think it is that a family of 3 car owners would park 2 in the garage and 1 behind? And if those cars are being actively used?
Definitely a valid question. I mean, I think that the reality goes to, if it was not to be counted, and I don't think it is counted per the ordinance or anything, the concept of parking 1 car in a driveway and 1 car in the garage kind of relates to the same predicament. Obviously, I do a lot of architecture in many towns that have detached garages with very long driveways that often set up the scenario that you have to individually pull out cars in order to, maintain egress and access to the property. So practically it does exist, and it's just something that people deal with when they have to, versus having to park farther away on the street or something.
Going back to, intent, this would be the view along Bay Avenue.
Correct.
And on the South Street, mirror.
Yep.
And if I drove in on Spring Street, on either side of me, this would be.
That is correct.
Any other questions?
Just on the setbacks, is there a reason that you put the shorter setback on the Bay Avenue side versus the South Second Avenue side? Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's the same on both sides, I apologize. I just read the chart, thank you.
You're saying that now 27 spaces on the site, as opposed to the 16 you're doing?
I don't think we count.
No, they're not legal.
Yeah.
We can't count the 2, just 1 inside.
Okay.
We're still 3 short.
We're still 16.
16 and 19.
There's not, you can't do the, not cul-de-sac, or the whole again.
Last time I think we agreed that there would be appropriate signage and whatever to make sure that didn't happen, but really we're just pointing it out. For 3 shores, we've got some street parking and in a pinch if somebody, but we understand it's 2 is the max legally.
Explain some of the various regulations are requested from a design standpoint. Your opinion that a mixed-use building cannot be designed for this site?
Well, it's not about anything not being able to be designed as much as the practicality. Like you mentioned the flood zone, for example. I mean, every retail or mixed-use application usually has some type of ground access, specifically with ADA requirements and such. We have to lift this building because of the flood. I mean, you can bury a building into the floodwaters, but then the amount of floodproofing that's required in order to make that functional is problematic. Obviously, I think the ideals as to what FEMA has set up is the promotion of raising a building out of the flood zone so that if, for example, this building did get wet in a flood event, we're talking about a ground floor that's basically made out of concrete and is used for parking cars and bicycles. And so even once the waters have exhausted themselves, it's a pretty easy, wash down repair of getting it back into a functional garage.
One issue is the parking if you have mixed use.
Oh, yeah. The parking is also a matter that was discussed with regards to having a mixed use on site.
Well, what if, for example, you didn't have a clear building? You had the front building with residential on top, and let's say 4 commercial units on the bottom, and you have surface parking in the rear.
So that would be the commercial units in the flood zone.
I mean, it's going to be in the flood zone anywhere on Bay Avenue.
If you had a building in the back, not enough room, you have one line of cars, you have to have dumpsters back there, because it's going to be behind individual shops. You have that area of the dumpsters, you could probably fit in 8 spots back, where the building, maybe 10 spots. I agree. I love that.
Well, I think we're dealing with what's in front of us, so, the application for us. Looking forward. You have a question?
To follow up on, Mr. Reed's questions about the variance, the basis for variances, can you help us understand why you designed this so that there's almost no outdoor space at all for multiple residential properties?
Well, so, I mean, obviously the classification of the outdoor spaces, we did incorporate some type of outdoor front porch to be on every single one of these projects.
So it's a back porch, right?
Sometimes I consider it the front because this is how the residents will be pulling into the space. So they have their traditional driveways and everything in front. And there is some outdoor green space, even though it hasn't been dedicated as such for any particular use. We've incorporated the front porch, and obviously the third floor does have the balconies that extend outward on each side.
How much porch space is there? This is a little space on that side of the door, correct?
The porches were 6 feet deep and 12 feet wide.
Is that small space on either side of the door?
Yes, correct. The door is centrally located and there's space on either side. And then we have the upper attic balconies that are 8 feet wide and I want to say project out probably similarly to 6 by 8 on the balcony.
Say what you said, just making it 6 units and we'll have to go for a parking lot. If you ever just making it 6 units instead of 8, and we would have to go for a parking variance, this way you keep all that parking on the inside, on that property.
Well, I think our focus has been more on the use variance, the parking, because of the availability of parking along Spring Street, and the fact that, as we've said, while we can only legally have 2, there is room for the car. It didn't seem a big enough concern, at least initially. It may make it a bigger concern for us, but initially, we didn't feel like if we tried to design like that, the fact that we have 16 instead of 19 parking spaces. But it'd be, again, because of, the Spring Street does have,
High parking everywhere on island, that's why. I mean, and the way you're designing now, you're creating even more of a tight spot. Because you don't have enough parking on your own property for what you want.
just wondering, it's a valid concern.
I think when you look at the variance, you're asking for a lot of them have to deal with the density of the proposed buildings, right? So you're looking for a lot density that's significantly higher than what's allowed. So you're going for like as much as you possibly get on the property. And maybe you can help us understand like the basis for not just from a parking point of view, but from a lot area point of view, why are you asking for such big variance on the lot area?
I'll let Brian speak to it, but I think that, again, going back to the fact that we're losing that ground floor has an impact on what we can design it. We were in this place where we'd have to give up the ground floor.
Yeah, it is a valid point because obviously there's a space that exists here that's shown here, but it's not a usable or functional space because of the flood zone. But I mean, even with regards to just the overall scale of the buildings and everything, this, as far as the layout on the lot, was working from all perspectives with regards to the size of the spaces we were creating. And I understand that we can't count that other parking space down there. If you said that each unit needed 2.5 spots, we have half a spot. That shouldn't fully count, but it's there. And so that kind of was just a thought process that we can make the most of what we have down on that level where we can use while developing something that, fit the needs obviously to what the space is done.
You have questions from the board? Any questions from the audience? Is there anybody here? That's okay, we don't want to say. You're right.
I will, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I think next I'll go, with Mr. Survivor. I think it would be brief, this is a follow-up from last time, and then we'll go to Mr. Roberts.
Just trying to get rid of one, so we don't.
Good to go.
Mr. Survivor has brought with him a traffic statement of the property, so.
Is it a statement or a statement?
It's traffic report, so. Going to,
Eight 12.
Yes, it's a draft report that's on page there.
okay, Mr. Scott, can you just give the board the benefit of how you went about, doing the calculations and what the conclusions that were reached in the report?
Sure. Yeah, there were some questions last time about the amount of trips generated by this project, I think more so from the public than from the board. So, I put together this analysis of anticipated trips, coming from the site. And I did it in two parts. The state residential site improvement standards have a table 4.1 where they estimate the amount of trips per day coming from different project uses. And they estimate just under 6 trips per day per townhouse unit. So for an 8-unit townhouse project, it would be anticipated that there would be about 47 total trips per day. And then I relied upon the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual to determine what the peak trips would be, both AM and PM. And I provided that toward the bottom of the sheet, whereby in the morning it would be expected to be 2 trips entering, 4 trips exiting. In the afternoon peak hour, it would be anticipated that there would be about 3 trips entering and about 3 trips exiting.
That's 12 per unit per day.
I'm sorry?
Is that 12 per unit per day? Or is that for the whole?
Oh, that would be for all 8 units.
Oh, boy.
That's peak hour.
Is there,
For the whole day would be the 47 trips per day. For all 8 units.
And I'm sorry, you said you're assuming it's 2-bedroom townhouse, but these are 3-bedroom, aren't they?
Check mine. I know. Nice catch.
but it'd be fair to say the state statute talks about approximately 10, trips per day for a single family residence.
I think it's on over 8 or 10.9.
So if it was, you know, I would characterize that it's not going to be a significant difference between a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom. It might be slightly higher than this, but it's going to be less than 10 trips per unit per day. Wouldn't be a significant change. We could certainly clarify that. So.
Well, I guess also, there's still 2 cars. Those 2 cars would be trips, regardless of the household has 2 people, 3 people, 5 people, or whatever have you.
The space available in park, utility of the space for someone that's going to live there would certainly weigh in on that. I'm losing that. I thought this would be 6 for the day per unit, or 48 trips, correct?
Yes.
And you're just saying the state, there's 2 different categories, right? Single family home would say total trips per day for a single family home, and somewhere in the range of a little bit of what kind of lose the number, 6 might threw that out as a reference, so that you can draw between a 2-bedroom unit and a single family. So the answer is probably close to 8, I guess. Total trips per day, times basically you give us a 64 instead of 47, perhaps. And there's no differentiation between rental and the owners, it's just residential. Right.
Or the line from the traffic report, any other questions about that?
Based on this representation, we'll lay out your experience with traffic generation and site plans and residential type uses. Your opinion that this would have a significant no increase, what would be the impact on the local roadway and walkway?
I wouldn't consider it insignificant, but certainly not significant either. You know, 6 trips during peak hour is hardly anything that's going to be noticeable. 60 trips over the course of the day, again, I don't think would be anything that would be noticeable from the people that live in the immediate area. Well, in general, what would you say would be a higher volume of traffic, residential or commercial? Commercial would be. Commercial would have a lot of turnover. Probably I don't want to put a number on it, but likely a commercial use would probably have 2 to 3 times the trip demand that residential. I would also imagine probably the parking requirements as well. It would.
Can I just ask what you think the impact will be on that neighborhood, considering how narrow Spring Street is, which will be your egress point, with the total property? In fact, Spring Street's not a particularly wide road, it's quite narrow, and there's always cars parked on the other side of that street alongside that business. And how impactful do you think it'll be to the neighborhood, having that volume of traffic coming in and out of that?
I don't think it's, again, the peak demand would be 1 car every 10 minutes, and I just don't see that increase in traffic as being anything that would impact Spring Street or the intersection. That road is kind of narrow, is it?
Yeah.
It's not a one-way road, it's not one-way.
As far as you pay that,
So cars should be wide first.
yeah, on our road.
Well, Rob, if you have cars parked on both sides, you have like 1 car go down the middle of that road and it's not.
Sorry?
It's not enough for 2 lanes of cars parked on both sides of that street. It's,
On each lane, so 11 feet.
no, I'm saying Spring Street is not, I think people park on both sides of Spring, and then you basically end up with like 1 lane down the middle of Spring. It's not enough for cars to be parked on both sides of Spring, and then cars come back and forth both ways. That's all I'm saying. It's more narrow than a 2-lane road with parking.
You're gonna have to remember, when we're gonna talk about parking, there's a stop sign on the corner of Bay Avenue. You can't put 50 feet from that stop sign. 50 feet and it'll pass the driveway. No cars are gonna be parked right there. Not gonna go out. On the other side, you can't park 25 feet to the sideline of the street. So you might get maybe one spot on that side. The other side where the M&R building is, that blacktop goes right up, and I don't know where the property line goes.
Right.
And what you're gonna see on South Second Street, they're gonna put a curb here, there's no curb line right now.
Yep.
Most likely, when that's done, there's gonna be an ordinance wanting to be parking on that side. There's no curb line right now, just the blacktop or the curb. What you're gonna see on the other side as well, on the M&R side. So maybe you're gonna get, so this is 34 feet is the building, that's 38 feet. You're gonna go right to the driveway. It's not gonna be, there's gonna be
No parking on
No
the side
parking.
of Sprint.
on that whole one side.
That's
You might
helpful.
get 25, yeah, you might get one spot back here.
That's definitely too.
And this one, Sprint, it varies from about 33 to 35 feet wide. About 35 a day, and 33 to 7. Any other questions?
Okay, no questions, then, call Mr. Robinson.
Raise your right hand. Very first one, what is here, hopefully it's not about true. Yes, I do. I wonder, they can start your last name and give where you're at.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. My name is David G. Roberts, Roberts, principal and president of BG Roberts Planning and Design, 37 Bayview Avenue, Bayview, New Jersey.
What is your background?
Sure. I've been practicing. I'm a licensed professional planner and licensed landscape architect in the state of New Jersey. Also, a lead accredited professional with specialties in neighborhood development and building design and construction. I've been practicing planning for 39 years. Most recently, I'm a full-time township planner in Toms River for the past 4 years. Prior to that, 22 years in private practice with 2 different firms. Most recently, Major Consulting. Before that, Short Comma. During that period of time, for a brief period of time, I actually was the zoning board adjustment planner for Borough Highlands. Probably about between 15 and 20 years ago. From the zoning board of adjustment, I believe it was a separate board at the time in Highlands. If it wasn't, then it was this board. Yeah, okay. I was only brought in on, I was working on a couple of use science cases. One had to do with the telecommunications monopole over on 36. There was also, I believe, one townhouse development over by the waterfront commercial district, one of the first ones to come into the borough. I believe I provided planning coverage for the board for, but it is a long time ago. Just a few other points. My specialty areas are in environmental design and in sustainable design, but also most specifically in redevelopment. And one of just a couple of examples of that, I'm co-author with Stan Slahecka of the Redevelopment Handbook, which has been put out 2 editions, most recently in 2012. I developed and co-instructed the principal redevelopment class for the Department of Community Affairs and Electors from 1997 until probably around 2010 when they changed the structure of the course. And I practiced where I've represented many, as a consultant, a variety of towns ranging from suburban towns to small boroughs to cities like Hoboken, which I'm still involved with today, doing redevelopment. So those are just a little bit of a background. I'm also past president of the New Jersey chapter of the American Planning Association and past president of the New Jersey chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects.
Yeah, I think you're very qualified. You'll make it.
I feel old, you know. It's been a long time.
After the hard part.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Sure.
Could you just again identify the various issues?
Sure, but before I do that, I'm gonna have to try to circulate around. I have a handout that I thought might be helpful to the board. I just kind of walk you through so you have something you can see right in front of you. And if I can take a moment to pass that around. Yes, it's simply called Townhouses at 95 to 99 Bay Avenue. And the title sheet is marked that way, block 41, lot 13.01, prepared by myself. Right, this is a double-sided color handout consisting of 15 pages. And basically, if you can, some of you probably have it that folds like a flip chart. Others may have it stapled on the side, but basically what I'll do is just I'll refer to the page numbers so that you can keep track of where I am. And it basically, Mr. Byrne asked what was the relief that we're asking for. I think as has been mentioned before, this is a purely residential townhouse development in the B2 zone, which is not a permitted use CBD, B2 CBD. Your master plan and zoning refers to it kind of both as B2 and as CBD. So I may use those terms kind of interchangeably, but if the zoning map shows it as on page, page 2, shows it clearly as CBD. And then what I try to do is on these first two graphics, give you just basic some context to where the site is located versus the background geography and the zoning that goes along with that. On page 1 is really simply a key map, which shows the outer boundaries of the islands and shows the subject property with a star, basically to show that it's along Bay Avenue, which runs roughly northwest southeast, and this is really the eastern end, or the southeast end of Bay Avenue. There's only basically 2 more blocks to go before you're in that waterfront commercial zone where bars is and some of the other marina type uses as you get to the bay. On page 2, the subject site is shown marked in yellow with a property line around it. Part of the reason for that is it gives you the idea in terms of not just where it's located, but its general dimensions. It's been referenced a number of times that the site has 3 sides, so it's effectively the end of the block, and it runs through the block from Bay Avenue to 2nd along Spring Street. So that is one of the principal things that I in my evaluation, I believe makes it unique and particularly suited for this development. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go along. One of the other things that in looking at the background of the 2004 master plan and the 2009 re-exam report and master plan update, some of the common themes that ran through those documents. One of the first things I wanted to point out in the zoning map is the shape and size and dimensions of the CBD. Generally, you find in many places that CBDs are much more compact and more centrally located in a lot of cases. One of the things I noticed about the CBD in Highlands is really it's very linear, almost like you would find along a major corridor, but with a much more sort of compact type of arrangement mixed in with residences and commercial, which I think is obvious to everybody here in the room, and also was pointed out numerous places in the master plan, both in 2004 and 2009. And it was one of the goals and objectives of the board going back in those documents in terms of the difficulty trying to get concentration or critical mass of commercial development along Bay Avenue. And that was one of the reasons why the idea of mixed use was introduced to try to come up with a way to entice new commercial development to come in by allowing some residential on top of it. So, but the most important thing I saw was the linear nature of it. Just to try to get a better handle on that, one of the things I did was, I noticed as I drove up and down Bay Avenue, trying to get a feel for things. It's been a while since I had been in town, was that between Waterwich, which really, as you come down off 36 on Waterwich, really when you make the right there is where the CD seems to start, where the commercial uses start. There's a concentration right at that intersection as you go southeast. Then as you move along that, there's pockets of residential, there's a couple of places where you have a couple of retail type uses, restaurants, etc. Then there's a gap, and then you'll see a few more. And as you move towards Spring Street, where this site is, it becomes somewhat spotty. You have several houses in one business, and then several more houses in one business. So, and then as you pass Spring Street, it significantly changes in terms of character as you move towards that waterfront commercial area, because you have more commercial buildings, garages, auto repair shops, things like that, is what I noticed. Now, that the distance that I calculated just as a straight line from Waterwich to Spring Street is about 3,100 feet, 3,100 linear feet, and that's a straight line. I used the Google Earth tool, the measurement tool on Google Earth. It doesn't account for the bow, the arc in Bay Avenue as you go from Waterwich down to Spring, and then south, and then Shrewsbury, and then down to the end. So that is probably, that measured out to about 3,600 feet all the way to south. So the reason I bring that up is that the length of that road, in terms of trying to come up with a balance, which is what I'm talking about this evening, the balance of residential that is needed to support the retail, is one of the things that I think is significant here, because the area is so stretched out in terms of where the businesses are located versus where the residences are located. So I think what I want to do next is go to page 3. This is really just a Google Earth shot that anyone can get off a computer with a north arrow on it, and it's just a sort of like a drone shot, if you will, of the site. It shows this Google Earth shot is several years old, as I'm sure everyone realizes. There's been some changes here in terms of road pavement and things of that sort, but it doesn't really change much in terms of giving an idea of the surrounding uses. And one thing that I thought was also interesting here is that, and it sort of makes this site unique, in addition to its 3 sides on Bay, Spring, and Second, it also butts up on the other side of Second to the Burlington property that's the linear, basically the DPW yard, and other types of facilities along that stretch. So the focus is the corner of the corner of Spring and Bay as sort of the focal point of that block. The next sheet on page 4 is really just simply the tax map, to sort of illustrate that once again. In terms of the percentage of the block 41, that the parcel, which is 18,000 square feet, is 150 feet wide by, I believe, 160 feet long, almost square, but not quite, 18,000 square feet with almost equal amount of frontage on the 3 streets. And then it gives you an idea of the other 3 blocks, block 42 across the street, and block 45, and then block 46 on the other side of Spring Street. The next couple pages, just again for background in terms of the suitability of the site and the nature of the site. The first Google Street shot on page 5 goes back to August of 2013. And this gives you an idea of some of the changes that have occurred, most of which have been sort of infrastructure improvements around the area. As you go to 2017, 4 years later, the new sidewalks and curbs have been added. And obviously 2013 was the year after Sandy, so there was a lot of recovery still yet to take place. The Sandy recovery was just getting started. And then finally, the more recent shot that was available when I went back and checked, because I had originally put this exhibit together about a year and a half ago, was that there was a new shot taken in 2019 of the same corner. And there's really not a whole lot of change that has taken place between 2017 and 2019, except that the property owner, Mr. McKay, acquired the property in that period of time, has cleaned it up, and I believe has cut the high grass and weeds and all the other things that were going on that property that made it, look more like the first slide on page 5. Page 7 is really just what you see across the street. There is open property across the street facing northwest, towards where the gas station is, and then the townhouse development right behind it. That townhouse development is a block away, about a block and a half away. It is in the R2.02 zone, and that's visible on page 8. One thing about that development, which is probably more typical of some of the townhouse developments that you usually see, where you only have half the block to work with. Typically, a block is divided in half, and half the property is front on one street, the other half of the block front on the other street. In our case, we front on both streets, and this townhouse development with the driveways in front on the street side is more often what you get, because you don't have the ability to front the project on two streets going through the block. And it is fairly typical. These townhouses are some of the newer construction in that immediate area. Getting to page 9, then looking at the layout that's been reviewed by Mr. Sherman and Mr. Brzezinski, you see that how the 4 units lay out on both streets, with the access coming in from the spring and side street to serve the rear. What makes this a really advantageous opportunity for layout for the townhouses is that you don't have any driveways on the public streets. They're all internalized. This would be more typical, almost with a block that was divided by an alley, which was a common layout done in neo-traditional type designs in older downtowns, going back centuries, where alleys were used for where the garbage was collected, where all of the services took place, and the formal front faced the street. And it also kept the on-street parking intact, so you didn't have driveways breaking up the ability to park on the street. So it kept the public parking on the street, kept the private parking in the rear. And that's one of the opportunities that we have with this site. I will get into the master plan a little bit. I might be getting a little bit out of order here, but the most recent observations made by the board in 2009, which is 11 years ago, okay, the most recent I could find online was 2009. So, okay, well, we can certainly look at that, but I think that the 2009 that's updated 2004 recognize a lot of the same conditions. My sense is that if there's a re-exam in 2016, the primary event that I would say would be the most significant thing that would have happened with Sandy, obviously, in 2012, that the 2009 re-exam report was not addressed. But I can see that if there's a 2016, I'll try to get a copy of it. And certainly if there's anything that's referenced in this document that has been updated, certainly that could be brought out. But I still think that there was the common theme that was in both, and I'll reference these bullets that are on page 10. Certainly if they change, I did hear earlier this evening that the board is being asked to review another area potentially for an area needing to be developed. In the 2004 master plan, there was also areas suggested as potential for study for area needing to be developed, one of which was the CBD redevelopment study area, which this property is in. And I'll get to some of the indications that support that, that are still valid today. But basically, these are the basic. This was almost a statement, a vision statement in the 2009 master plan re-exam. that was based off the review of the 2004, and it talks about the redevelopment community offering homes, employment services, civic spaces, and leisure and quality environment, which form part of the established communities of Bayshore region. That is a very broad goal, and it's certainly a valid goal, as valid today. It speaks to the balance of residential and non-residential uses that are, and civic spaces that create quality of neighborhood. Striving to increase the percentage of owner-occupied housing in the book. That I saw both in the 2004 master plan and the 2009 re-exam. Require infill development to be compatible with the neighborhood and conform to the setbacks of existing blocks on the block. This would be certainly an example of infill development. I think there's any question about that. This is one of the largest vacant pieces in that part of the Bay Avenue area. This would infill it. The question is, what's the best use for that infill opportunity? Create attractive gateways to the principal entrances of the borough. While this is not at a principal entrance to the borough, that would be farther to the east. It is an area which is effectively a transition. So it potentially could act as a what I would reference as a pioneer type development, where it stands out as in terms of its physical attractiveness and kind of marks a change. One of the things that I think is significant is that one of the land use objectives that was referenced in the 2004 master plan was that there was a recognition that there needed to be a consolidation of the businesses along Bay Avenue. That there was a problem with, and you can also speak to whether that problem exists today or has continued since then. But there was a problem of two basic problems. One was that commercial buildings were being converted to residential. And then the other problem was that the business uses along the corridor were too diffused, too dispersed, not focused enough, and that there should be an effort to try to concentrate them in smaller areas. That was land use issue number 6, and you'll see it on a page that's coming up on page 11. Just a couple of other bullets: encouraging redevelopment in areas that need rehabilitation or improvement. I think it's clear from everything you've seen that this is one of those areas and has remained one of those areas. Capitalize on the economic resources represented by Sandy Hook, Route 36, the Twin Lakes, etc. Those are all the major assets that the borough has had and continues to try to build on, and has been trying to build on them for many years, and has succeeded in many other parts of the borough. And then to encourage neighborhoods to improve their aesthetic appeal and identity. And I think that's one of the things that I think is really significant in this particular neighborhood, is as you move from Spring and continue to move in the southeast direction, the aesthetic appeal is not what the borough, I believe, is looking for, and certainly interested in trying to improve. And I think this project, because of its situation and the way it's arranged on the parcel, will go a long way to do that. This page 11 is really just highlighting a couple of those other issues. Land use issue number 6 is down at the bottom, which basically says the conversion of commercial uses to residential continues to be a problem. The commercial districts, particularly along Bay Avenue, should be reviewed to limit the location of commercial uses to well-defined areas. And I think that's really what, in some of the review, the tension and the struggle is really how much residential do you need to support the retail. There's a dichotomy there, and there is some literature on that's available. Some of it was relatively easy to obtain. One of the things, just to put it in perspective, one article that I reviewed that was put out by Congress of New Urbanism talked about the idea of, just in general, that based on certain calculations of the amount of revenue that needs to be spent to support certain types of businesses, that in general it would take 1,500 dwelling units to support one block of retail. That's going to vary from place to place and from region to region, depending on what other competing retail opportunities are around the neighborhood. But another way to look at it is in another study that was put out by a firm that is involved with the Urban Land Institute. There's a ratio of 72 square feet of retail for each household. So every household, depending on their spending habits, supports about 72 square feet of retail on the whole. About 40 square feet of that retail is potentially within a walking distance or within a short distance of where they live. Depending on the nature of the area, it could actually be as low as 15 square feet per unit, depending on, again, whether there's a shopping center nearby, whether the convenience is such that you'll pay a little bit more for something if it's close by, because it's more convenient. But that gives you an idea of the amount of residential development that's needed to support the retail. I think that's part of the key to this. What we're suggesting is you bring the general rule of thumb is the retail follows the rooftops. And you've already kind of recognized that in other parts of town, particularly along the waterfront. The waterfront commercial that where there's been residential introduced to the areas over, for example, by where the ferry is, which is a follow the principle of LEED and D, which is that you maximize your intensity close to transit. In this case, the ferry is the most convenient transit that you have. But in this case, it's the building up the residential to support the retail that you already have, as opposed to bringing in more retail, which competes with the rest of the retail that you already have. Building up the residential critical mass first, then focusing the retail in those portions that are well defined, which are referenced in the master plan. So then when we get to the special reasons, the particular suitability could be summed up by basically saying that the eastern section of the CBD, that last portion of it, still exhibits remnants of the commercial uses that predated Sandy. Some of those buildings are quite old, and that was evidenced, by the way, by a little bit of an analysis I did of the tax records in those 4 blocks that I referenced earlier, where the minority of the properties are retail. So in some cases, 2 out of 10, in some cases, 50% or less of the properties were commercial. The rest of them were either residential or vacant, and there were several vacant pieces in each block. So I think that's just a quick reference to the economic condition of a lot of commercial properties in the area. Their improvement ratios, which if you look at your tax dollar, you have part of your tax dollars is your land value, part of your tax dollar is your improvement value. One of the things you'll probably see in this report that you'll get from Mr. Greigel for this area that you're about to study is some evaluation of the differences between the properties in terms of improvement ratios. If you have, generally speaking, an improvement ratio of 0.5, that means that the improvement, the building, the parking area, whatever those improvements are on that property, are valued the same as the land. So when you add the building and the land together, you get 100% of the value. Generally, you want your improvements to be more valuable than the land they sit on. And when they are less valuable than the land they sit on, that's an indication that the land is being underutilized. It could be better utilized with higher improvement values. So many times, that's a relationship of the age of the buildings are depreciated as they're assessed. But what's interesting is that some of the improvement ratios for some of the commercial properties in the 3 blocks or 4 blocks I looked at were as low as probably 0.12 up to maybe in some cases they were just over 0.5. The residential properties, on the other hand, these are mostly single-family homes, 2-family homes. They're ranked as 2 in your tax rolls, which is an indication of either 1 or 2 families. They were between 50 and 75, 0.5 and 0.75. The highest that I saw in any of the blocks were actually the townhouse development that I showed you in that reference. They were at 0.88. That means that the value of the unit is 88% of the total value, which means the land value is relatively narrow. Part of that can be explained because the lots are smaller because there's townhouses sitting on them. But it gives you an indication from a tax revenue standpoint and utilization revenue standpoint that we are talking about an area that's underutilized and could be significantly improved by the development scheme that's proposed. There's a number of purposes of zoning that go along with that. I'm sure you've heard them a number of times. These are in part of the municipal land law. Section 2, to encourage municipal action to guide appropriate use for the development of all lands in a manner which will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. In this case, my opinion is that this proposed use is the most appropriate for this particular property in this particular situation. And there's a couple of reasons for that too that have already been alluded to. The permitted uses would be commercial or mixed use. In both cases, the fact that not only is it in an area that doesn't have a lot of critical mass of other commercial uses to build around, it doesn't have a concentration of residential to help buoy it up, but it's also in a flood zone. And, one of the things that I noticed, at least along Bay Avenue, is I didn't see any new commercial development, at least anything that would have come in after 2012. And that's significant because if you were flooded, if you had a commercial business, retail business, you suffered flood damage, as long as you weren't substantially damaged, for the most part, you cleaned up your store and you reopened, but you didn't have to elevate. And even if you got into that situation, you wouldn't be elevating if you're retail because that would put you out of business. What you would do is especially retail, especially from the experience that I've seen in Hoboken and other places where there are already a lot of mixed use, is they have to dry flood proof, which basically means they have to take measures to keep the water out, as opposed to wet proofing where they let the water flow through. That makes it very difficult to support a retail space and very expensive to build it because in order to get your building permit, you're going to have to flood proof it one way or the other. If you wet proof it, you're going to have to accept the fact you might use inventory if you have a flood event. If you dry proof it, it's going to be expensive. So that's another obstacle to trying to get the retail, get a project that, even though the ultimate vision is mixed use, that's another impediment that's on top of everything else that's already a challenge. So I think the other purposes of zoning, just quickly providing a sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses, and it mentions agricultural, residential, recreational, commercial, etc. So it's really talking to a balance, which I think references the amount of residential needed to support the retail. You're not going to be pulling in, except during the tourist season. Most of the time, you're going to have to rely on the folks that live around these uses to support them. The E is to promote the establishment of appropriate population densities and concentrations that will contribute to the well-being of persons, neighborhoods, communities, and regions. That's purpose E. That again talks about the population concentration that will balance out the retail. And then finally, to promote a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques and good civic design and arrangement. In this case, the block kind of dictates the design. The design took advantage of the three street frontages of the site. Once you get past the special reasons and the purposes of the use, allowing the use even though it's not permitted, you have to also do the two-pronged test on the negative criteria. One is that there be no substantial adverse on the public welfare. There has been, I think, the contrast between this proposed development and the development that's immediately around the block itself is that this development represents a significant improvement. So for all intents and purposes, the uses that are around that property that have the impact as opposed to the property itself, with maybe the possible exception you could make, case you could make in terms of the 3 parking spots. And that's been talked about quite a bit. A parking shortage of 3 spaces in an area where there's a grid like the Highlands have, the cross streets, the avenues and side streets, which create that public parking block. And on property where you have 3 street frontages, even though it's been referenced before about the distance from a stop sign that would prevent parking, in some cases, you have other uses on the other side of the street that are competing for that street parking on both sides of the street. And on second, you have the DPW yard, which is not generating the on-street parking unless employees are parking along second. But you don't have any other type of development that is generating parking that is, you don't have a whole other side of the street of residential where everybody's parking on the street. So there is that sort of mitigating factor. One of the other issues is the density, and this gets to the page 14 of a substantial impairment of the zone plan ordinance. You have a couple of zones. The CBD talks about the 10 dwelling units per acre. It talks about ground floor commercial, residential on the upper floors, but not to exceed 10 units per acre. And it has other restrictions in terms of being limited to the third of the gross floor area. The other MF zone has a maximum of 14 per acre. In this case, we fit in order to fit the building on the property, it lent itself to 4 units on each side. 4 units, 8 units on 18,000 square feet comes out to 19 dwelling units per acre. So because when you compare it to the MF zone, you're a little bit higher in terms of the difference between 14 and 19. If you compare it to the CBD, you're a difference between 10 and 19. But I think the basic difference is these units are larger. It's been referenced before. They're townhouses, so they're not the same as the 1,000 square foot average apartment size that you might find above a retail use of some sort. So it actually basically is the site that dictates the density, because the site lends itself to the layout. And then finally, the subject area is in a flood zone that limits the street level use to either parking, storage, or flood-proof commercial uses, and the additional burden of floodproofing makes it even more difficult to support retail uses without additional density. So I think, in conclusion, on page 15, the site is particularly suited for the townhouse type of development. And I also, I don't want to stretch this out any longer than I have, but in the master plan, at least the 2004, which was the last full land use element, it wasn't just a region report, it was a total master plan. There's a number of references about infill development, and one of them is to limit the infill development so that effectively, again, it's talking about balance. If you're going to have any kind of multifamily to limit its impact on the character of the surrounding area, a townhouse development as opposed to an apartment use, which would be another option. You have to still put parking under the building. You still have to do the elevate the lowest levels. The units would end up being smaller. The townhouse development is more of a single family style, even though they're attached. And it's kind of a compromise between the two. The surrounding neighborhood along Bay Boulevard is identified as a possible development area. The subject property is particularly underutilized and unsightly, and the proposed development represents a dramatic improvement and substantial investment in the neighborhood that would advance the purposes of zoning. One of the other things that's common is when you see an investment like this in a property this visible and this significant impacts on 2 different streets, that sends a signal to the rest of the development community that there's interest in investing in this part of the borough. That oftentimes doesn't guarantee it, but in my experience in redevelopment all around the state, that first project is critical to starting to get some momentum back. I think that especially when things seem like they've been stagnant since Sandy and the recovery's been rough, the project like this would be a catalyst, I think, to more investment, hopefully on this end of Bay Avenue, so you can start with some of the projects that are already happening on up closer, more to the northwest, closer to the ferry. You have a pioneer project here that establishes the second front. We try to work towards them. The density created by the 8 townhouses is a function of the layout, I mentioned before, 4 units fronting on 2 streets, which creates a streetscape or street frontage that fills in that hole that's there currently. And then the infilling of the subject portion of Bay Avenue with residential supports the consolidation of retail to the west along Bay Avenue, advancing one of the objectives of the 2009 Main report. So that's really just sort of walking you through the handout and summarizing the points, acknowledging that there's been a 2016 update, but I certainly would be happy to respond to anything in that update that would contradict anything that's already been referenced.
Well, I guess, with the 2016 Christian Youth Psychologist too, Chief Burton, the biggest difference is, they extended the CBD, corridor. It was that whole exit town, they connected it all the way through. That was the only thing major. So they didn't really change the nature of it. It is, standard one.
Well, I think that's interesting, and it's interesting, and it kind of contradicts my observation that it's already elongated, but I was basing that on your zoning map currently, which shows that CBD stretched out from the
Well, it is on the
zoning map.
master plan, it is clearly defined as stretched out.
Right. Right, so I think that supports the observation I took from the size of the CBD was from the current zoning map, which I believe is from that 2016, master plan, because it's exactly the way you just described it.
And this particular, parcel of property hasn't changed. It's been, as far as I know, the same zone, since 2004. It hasn't changed at all.
Yeah, that would be my understanding too, just from what I looked at in terms of the mapping in the 2004, master plan, for example, that identified the CBD, potential CBD redevelopment areas, including this property on that end of Bay Avenue. So I appreciate that. I don't think that would really change anything I've, observed in terms of today, what's taking place, what I see there today versus what your overall objective for Bay Avenue has always been for the borough, which is to try to make a real Main Street out of it. And that's hard when it's that.
Well, I guess, quite frankly, this is the first application we've had in regards to anything new on the entire corridor. There's been some different changes of use since tried, but existing properties of buildings there. But as far as I know, not on the Bay Avenue. What was there on Bay Avenue?
One to drive through, only one drive through, part of the back.
So the old Gibbons property maybe?
This block by lot also, we had one request from the council, as the mayor alluded to earlier. This is what they're requesting, this block by lot specifically, be in that area.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, because I only overheard, I only overheard the general description, but I was wondering if this block and lot was going to be included in that area, that study area. And I certainly, I have a breakdown that of blocks 41, 42, 45, 46, where I looked at the improvement ratios, and I certainly think that that's only one part of the study, but at least that would include Spring Street and this property that, and probably the property across the street, I would think, on the other corner of Second and Spring, which is also very similar in appearance to this property, and there are a number of other vacant pieces on those blocks. That is something the planner is going to be cataloging and sort of breaking down for you to sort of paint a picture of an area that's underutilized. And I think the physical observation of the condition of the buildings, which is reflected in the improvement ratios, I think is all going to speak to that. But I'm not surprised to hear that, is I guess what I'm saying, because it's been a long time. I didn't do and I thought about it, but I never did the historic aerial search to see just how long this property's been vacant. But it must be decades from where.
40 years.
Yeah.
Wasn't that what was, yeah, 40 years is what.
Right. I'm not surprised.
Bowling alley or people over there?
So I guess that the point is really that.
Oh, correct.
And what you might find is normally when you do a redevelopment investigation, I think you have redevelopment plans. I know there's been some areas talked about in the borough as far as being in need of redevelopment or studied for need of redevelopment. But basically, the next step would be to do a redevelopment plan for that area. That redevelopment plan would dictate the new zoning for that area. So, and it then allows you to do a number of other things in terms of trying to incentivize investment. So what I would reference there is that many times when you do a redevelopment plan, you take examples of things that work and that fit, and you build on those. So in this case, you're looking at this as a use variance, but it could very well be an example of what that redevelopment plan would encourage more of in certain spots. Because, and I also have I brought one of those reports, the full report, and I'd be happy to share it with the board, which gives you the analysis of the retail versus residential, and it talks about what neighborhoods need in terms of that, if it would help you with your redevelopment planning. But I think the point is that the building blocks are important, and a lot of times what the literature says about elongated areas is that you break them into nodes. So your redevelopment plan might very easily show several blocks as being focused for mixed use, and then the blocks on the other side of them focused for blocks for development such as this, which helps support that business that you're trying to bring in. Because trying to attract the retail without having that residential critical mass to support it is going to be tough, especially in the flood zone. I think I've already mentioned that.
Just to summarize that, in your opinion, as an expert in area planning and land use, does this particular property satisfy the requirements for a use variance? As you understand in the state of New Jersey specifically, that it is particularly suited for the variance that we just saw here.
Yeah, well, I think the reason that it's site specific, uniquely suited, and uniquely suited for this use is because of the fact that it's on 3 frontages, which allows you to split the townhouses up on 2 different streets and keep the driveways from adding curb cuts to Bay Avenue, which would be counterproductive. Focusing the curb cut on the side streets. And that gives you 2 opportunities for unbroken frontages, which certainly don't reduce the amount of on-street parking and will create streetscapes on both sides of the block. And on the Second Avenue side, it will definitely be a dramatic difference from what's around it. So I think that the site is particularly suited for, and if not, it would be tough to find another site that has the same exact attributes that lends itself to this kind of development as much as this site.
And you said that program, I believe, you're that there's no substantial impairment of the zone plan, and that there's no substantial adverse impact on the public.
Yes, and I think that's why all of the testimony on the master plan and the overall goals and objectives that FIRST have been working on for many years to try to make Bay Avenue into a real vibrant Main Street, that I've tried to point out some of the challenges to do that, especially in the flood zone, that I believe speaks to trying to concentrate the retail uses in nodes along Bay Avenue. I think that potentially could be and it almost already is, but they would just need to be reinforced, which was what land use issue number 6 talked about in them. So I don't believe it would substantially impair the master plan in that regard.
I would open it up to another 40 big questions, but you bring board and the question.
Clarification. Is your opinion that the borough is underdeveloped residentially, and that's what needs to be done in order to support the retail?
I think it just, when I talk about the ratio of residential to commercial, I'm really focusing on Bay Avenue. And it's not just the traditional wood frame homes that you see mixed in with the business on Bay Avenue. It's the infusion of enough concentration to support that retail. Right now, there's the critical mass just doesn't seem to be there. That's generally a response to some of the literature that talks about, it takes 1,500 units to support a block of retail. So you have a retail, if you have a block of retail, within walking distance, which is in this particular case, one of the reasons why I was curious about the length between the Waterwich and basically from one end to the other where the commercial uses already are is about 3,600 feet. Walking distance is about 1,000 feet roughly. About a quarter of a mile is about how much people would be willing to walk to a business or a restaurant or something like that. With 3,600 feet, you're almost at 2/3 to 3/4 of a mile from one end to the other. So the idea would be to spot the retail so that there would be no situation along Bay Avenue where you would be walking more than a quarter mile to that retail. That's the general concept.
How does that dovetail with the idea of people not on the street, coming to use the retail. I mean, obviously, the parking won't be just the people living in the street.
That's true, yeah. There is always going to be a balance, especially in an area that has a percentage of summer visitors. And also, in this case, I think the borough has been as much focused on the commuter because of the ferry, the attractiveness of having a waterfront community, which is a ferry ride away from Lower Manhattan, has always been, it almost is a seashore bedroom community for those commuters. So there's a component to that. That's why you see most of your density concentrated. I think the newer development is closer to where the ferry terminal is. But I think the same principle could be applied to Bay Avenue. In fact, the waterfront commercial zones have been broken up into subcategories, one of which is waterfront commercial, WC-R, WC-T, which was trying to allow for those kinds of higher density development to be in those areas along the waterfront, because the waterfront wasn't waterfront commercial all the way down from end to end. I think it's basically the same principle here. It's just being applied to kind of creating that Main Street critical mass so that there's enough there so that people will be attracted to go here and not ride out to somewhere else on 36 if they want to go out to a restaurant or go shopping or whatever.
The question about the two components of assessment, the land and improvement. If assuming there is an improvement on a property, is it, I'm asking because I don't know, board understand value, on the tax appeal. So, in the reality of the tax appeals, it doesn't matter how much you put for land to build, it's one number. And you can't break it out and change my land, just my improvements, change the assessment reduction. So, with that thought in mind, I'm having trouble understanding the concept of using the percentages of the improvement for the land, especially with times that I said on other times, that I think their observation would be that almost uniformly the value of the land, the greater value is the improvement, unless you have over-improved improvement. Land is where the money is. You see these prices going up, it's because of the location. And exactly that's going on everywhere, especially this time. So, I'm ready to go connecting that concept to zoning.
And just again, I'll try to address that, Mr. Baxter, but let me just go through the general summary, which I was trying not to get too far into these before, but if you look at block 41, which is the block that the subject property is on, there are 2 4A properties out of 10 total properties on the block. So 20% of the total properties are commercial. There are, and the entire block is zoned CBD. There are 2, 4, 6 out of 7 other properties that are residential. And then the vacant property, which is our property. So again, the minority, just thinking in terms of the concentration of commercial versus the concentration of residential, it is not it wouldn't be one of those areas where you're trying to reinforce existing commercial. There's only 2 out of 10 properties. On block 35 plus, I believe, check. I was going to say across the street. I think it is across the street. Yes, block 45 across the street, which is half in the CBD and half in the R.202. There's 1 commercial property. In block 46, which is the next block on the other side of Spring Street, there are 3 out of 8 total properties that are commercial, 3 out of 8 that are residential, and then 1 that is 1 of 3 which is vacant. And then on block 42, again, 3 out of 14 total properties, but that is because half the block is in the CBD and half the block is in the R.202. But so you basically have a total of 2, 3, 6, 9 properties that are commercial on 4 blocks that front that avenue. And that's just really an illustration of the dilution of the commercial properties as opposed to residential properties that are already there. Introducing this kind of residential property on this block, therefore, is not going to impact the ratio of commercial. If anything, it's going to reinforce the businesses that are there rather than trying to compete with them. And then the improvement ratios was just an observation in that just to give you a couple examples of the difference of improvement values, the townhouses are the highest at 0.88. And the commercial properties in general were the lowest on either end of the scale, probably as a result of their physical condition and their age. I would think that they've been depreciated over time. And normally, when you start getting in, your planner will start to get into this more and more. That's why he's asked for construction permits, violation notices, all that kind of information from the borough. You try to find out what the level of investment has been in these buildings, even though they may not have been expanded. Did they put new roofs on? Did they put in new heating ventilation systems in there? Did they spend any money on the building at all, or have they been letting the buildings deteriorate over time? That's something he'll get into when he starts analyzing that. These improvement ratios are not entirely conclusive, but they are indicators of the economic condition of the block. I hope if that helps at all. I was just reinforcing what I was observing about physical condition of this immediate area.
How do you square the board's functions of complying with design ordinance with the professional thing that in so many words, copyright law, that it's not zoned correctly, should permit the type of thing. I'm not saying that, but that's effectively fine. It should allow for this type of residential development in order to support the commercial authority. The town doesn't do that now. And this board is supposed to be complying with that ordinance domestically. So how do you argue that the board should just during notification like that, ignore that, so this is a better idea, which would not be complying with the zone plan.
Well, I think my response to that would be, one thing we would be careful not to do would be to suggest that the board should rezone by variance. In this particular case, that's why I think that you would not necessarily be able to apply these same factors very many other places in the borough, especially along Bay Avenue, because it'd be very hard to find an 18,000 square foot block with frontages on 3 streets that lends itself to this kind of a layout, and that potentially would have this significant impact in terms of visual economic impact on 3 different street frontages as this particular property would have. So I think the board can make a distinction in terms of applying the proofs that the statute allows to enable this use variance to be granted. My main point was indicating that I don't believe that it would do substantial harm to the zone plan and ordinance because of a lot of the reasons I went into. And some of those were recommendations that may just not have yet been implemented in terms of things like concentrating the commercial into places where they already exist, which is really what land issue number 6 talked about in the land use element of the 2004 master
These statements, I think that you several times during your testimony that the property lends itself to 8 units. And I really just don't understand the justification that you're 40% over what would be allowed in a multifamily zone and almost 100% over what would be allowed in a business district. So can you help us understand why, the conclusions page says that the density created by 8 townhouses on the subject property is a function of the layout of 4 units crossing 2 streets, but the density is created by 8 units. So help us understand why, assuming we allowed residential and commercial business zones, why would we, what would be the basis for allowing this kind of density where nothing around this property has density along these lines from a residential point of view? And you say that it's consistent with other developments close by in the immediate area, but I live in that immediate area and I can't think of one development that has this kind of density.
But you look at the townhouse development on
It's on Center Street, but
Center Street.
that's 4 units with a very significant amount of green area around the property and 2 parking spaces in front of the houses. So there's no way the density is anything close to.
But it's much smaller parcel than this parcel.
What's the density from a unit point of view per acre?
I didn't calculate the density on that one, but, my point on it was that they're side by side, property line with driveways in the front facing on Center Street.
Right, but you also have large backyards, side yards, front yards, so it's, the density, I would say, is
Well, there's-
nothing like 19.5.
There's no front yards, but, I did concede they cut side yards and rear yards still attached, so.
There's a green space in front of every house, along with the road.
Right, because they're set back, like they would be required in a residential zone. But I think the point is really that idea of side-by-side townhouses expanding the width of the block is not unusual in that area. That's the one I saw, it was like right nearby. The answer to your question about this project is laying this out in a block that is a CBD, where you have unified frontage all the way down from corner to corner. Very rarely have, or at least you would prefer not to have breaks between the buildings. I know there's parking lots that break things up and whatever, but if you start to, so that the townhouses were laid out based on the footprint of the townhouse that's typical, they fit between in that 160 feet based on the average of 4 townhouses that are average of 40 feet per the side yard. They get down, gets down about somewhere between 20 and 30 feet wide and so on. And then your box. If you cut off the end unit on both sides, you're going to have a side yard there. But you're now walking down the avenue where you don't have side yards typically, and you're going to have a gap in that block. So that's what I'm saying. That the block itself, the parcel itself, effectively generated the density because of the layout. They laid it out based on the dimensions of the property. You ended up with 4 and 4. That generated the 8 units, which creates the density. It's not like they were trying to go up with the box and squeeze 20 units and end up with density. But I don't know if that helps you at all, but that's what I meant to say in that bullet.
So, but I guess my point is there's very few cases on Bay Avenue where there's that much uninterrupted frontage. So that would be actually fairly unusual on Bay Avenue to have.
But in side yards, you would say those usually are between adjoining houses.
Correct. Well,
Yeah.
those 2 businesses, it's not like First Avenue and Highlands. There's blocks of buildings with no space in between. That's not what Bay Avenue set up. What makes me wonder about the density and the picture of the density is now you have a parking shortage in an area of town where there's already parking issues. There's no on-property garbage location. So we were told people could basically point their garbage cans out to Spring Street. So now you have 8 properties pointing garbage cans out to Spring Street twice a week. So I just don't see how that's a positive. A positive picture and saying there's not an impact on public welfare. You have 8 houses with garbage cans on the sidewalk of a narrow street, and you're going to have people parking on Bay Avenue, taking parking away from the American Legion, Musty Lobster, the bakery, and starting businesses. So I'm just trying to get a feel for how you support the density against all the other criteria.
Right, and I totally understand that point. I think, again, I mentioned that the parking point is that there are no competing users of that street parking on the other side of the street, at least on Second.
On Bay Avenue there are.
Well, on Bay Avenue there are, and in fact, you would have the same parking spaces there that you have now. In some cases, the property, the users of the parking on Bay Avenue are benefiting from the fact that this property's been vacant for 4 years. So this property has effectively the entitlement of the frontage in front of it just as much as the other properties on any of the other blocks. So I think that mitigates against 3 parking spaces, which is not an extreme shortage, especially when you think about the fact that even though they're not counted, there's physical space for extra cars if it becomes an issue with not being able to find a place to park when you come home to your new townhouse in the evening. And the garbage question, I think, is certainly one to consider, although in this case, there won't be any other properties on that side of Spring Street that will be putting garbage cans out, as opposed if there were several single-family homes fronting on Spring Street that have their own driveways that put their garbage cans out at the same time. And I also think that's a design question that potentially could be solved. The townhouses that we were talking about earlier on Central Street, my guess is they probably keep their cans in the garage, although one I did see is actually in the image, the can is in front of the garage facing the street. So you're basically looking at the can all the time. So I think, there's valid questions, but I don't think they necessarily are a result of the density. That would be my response.
Well, if you have less density, you have less, you would be a perk variance, and you have a single location for a central dumpster for all the tenants of the properties to take their garbage to a central garbage collection site and then have a private garbage company come in and take that garbage out, which is what happens with most of the other townhouse developments or condo developments in town.
I think with the garbage, we even talked last time, I think, about possibly having the garbage. The garbage can be adjusted to be whatever the board's preference is. Obviously, the parking is different.
But there's no on-premises, there's no location on premises that I can identify where you can put a dumpster.
Don't think there's dumpsters with garbage cans, but it's not
Or-
commercial.
Let's find the garbage truck and what's up the back.
Like, pick up the cans right on top of the other.
Well,
It wasn't necessarily that a truck could perhaps pull back into, how the street was, where we did get turns, radius, all that. I mean, I think there's other properties in town where that probably is.
But, just figure that you feel, my understanding is our municipal garbage people will not enter private property.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Yeah.
This country almost similar to what we see over there, if you look around, Lennox Street, where you have townhomes being beside the property what they have. Which is an access that's up on Rocket Street as well. It's like limited access, it's the same as Fulton Road. Like zoning.
But now that you put a density point of view, I'm not.
I'm talking about the road, you're going here.
Yeah.
I have an issue with, you make every homeowner who raises their house have luxury parking. Why should we grant you a variance for more parking when we can't, we're like the homeowners that, have their own houses here, when they raise them, have on-street parking.
Well, that's a question for them, it's just a more question for us. Actually, I think I have that a little bit. There are meeting requirements for 2-car parking per unit, but I guess you need,
Even if there's a variance, but if they doesn't have enough parking.
yeah, for 3-car parking, which is in essence, visitor parking.
No, it's because they have 3 months, 3
It's
bedrooms.
required by, so he's asking for a variance for it. So, I mean, if we make our homeowners in this town raise their houses and have to have luxury parking, why should we grant you a variance for your luxury?
One is the regular on-street parking because there's not a curb cut into the garage, that's why we need some street parking. We're not taking out street parking. I was wondering that too.
But it's still a single unit. You're still asking for a variance if you don't have enough parking spaces for all your units.
We have a question that we are asking for a variance. What we're asking, I guess, is that you take into consideration, there's probably over 100 feet of frontage there where cars get parked.
We're trying to make it so we can get businesses. If we keep granting variances for homeowners to park on Bay Avenue, where the cars, where's the businesses customers gonna park.
The other thing I was gonna say is that, although it's not technically meeting the requirement, there is enough room for 2 cars in that garage.
Yeah, and how do we,
But you also have a front door on May Avenue, right? So I would
but you're not
posit
counting
that
that.
if you had 2 or 3 cars in the household, somebody's gonna park in the driveway, and the other 2 people are gonna park on May Avenue and enter through the front door.
Right.
Because in my experience, nobody parks behind each other in their garage and their driveway if they're both actively using their cars. So that again is my concern.
And I'm assuming some portion of those cars are gonna leave in the morning and be gone. Yeah.
I think, my own personal feeling,
most of the homes that we approved here are stacked parking.
Yeah.
Almost all of them. Very few, we've got very few applications where there's like side-by-side driveways and things like that. Almost all of them are under the house.
and you're still looking for a variance for, my own personal opinion, this is my own personal opinion. If you cut down on the units, you have a better chance. That's my own personal opinion. You only put 6 stamps, not 8.
Now, we're talking about 3 cars too. We're talking about 13 or 10.
That's what he's asking for. And plus, you have an area there, put container for garbage. That's my own personal opinion.
Appreciate that.
You discussed the importance of walkability and accessibility to the success of commercial developments or commercial units. Wouldn't this sort of infiltration of residential into a commercial district impair the walkability of commercial district?
So again, referring to the literature, in this case particularly, the rating system for future neighborhood development. First of all, the overall goal is to have compact, complete, and connected. That's the Watchword of a neighborhood that works. So it's not a matter of where the residential is located, it's the balance of the residential and the commercial. So if your concern is, well, we zone Bay Avenue for mixed use or commercial, and we're trying to bring one commercial in, when you're at this point trying to support the commercial that's already there. What my point is that allowing a limited amount of, in this case, you're doing it by use variance because you have control over that, of new residential, which are going to be potentially more attractive to more affluent tenants that will be more apt to spend money within walking distance if there's someplace for them to go. That would be more of an attraction to a potential new retailer that's coming in. So it goes back to, it's a pretty well accepted principle that the retail follows the rooftops. And right now, the retail that's here is too spread out. It's not concentrated enough to become a go-to place where people can go and have a choice of places to do whatever. They might have their favorite spot, I suspect, that they go to, that they can walk to from their house. But you haven't created that critical mass, and introducing a development like this will then support the businesses that are already there. And there are a couple within a block or so of Spring Street that the Lusty Lobster and Gianna's and other places that you could walk to from this spot and support that business. Right now it's a vacant lot. It's not supporting anything. So it's not a matter of where it is, it's the balance overall. And the borough is a walkable borough. It's the situation so that Bay Avenue is so long that you would have to be the neighborhoods along that portion of Bay Avenue to have a space to go to on that portion of Bay Avenue to support those businesses. So having some residential on Bay Avenue as well just helps in many places where we have, for example, in Fountain River, we have downtown that is a county seat that's typically 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, after 5 o'clock, everybody leaves. So there's no nightlife there because nobody lives there. That's the point of bringing in, we're now trying to bring in residential now to support the businesses that are already there, and then there'll be a certain amount of new commercial that will be supported by extremely high density, but most of that will be convenience oriented. What we're finding is that to get retail to come in, you almost have to promise them a certain amount of potential customers that are right there, because they're not going to be able to rely on someone coming from out of the area and driving there for that particular use. And we don't want to compete with our own traditional downtown business. Really, only one block. Probably less retail than you have in the Highlands, except it's one block instead of multiple blocks along 3600 feet of distance. So I think you have to look at it as the ideal would be to have mixed use all the way down Bay Avenue, but on the ends, the far eastern end, which is where we're talking about, and maybe even the midpoint between the section along from Waterwich down, which has the most number of restaurants, and then that stretch in between, maybe that's where you allow some residential in certain spots to help support those businesses that you're already have.
Well, the quite frankly, as all of us in the town succeed. Bay Avenue is a mixed use, residential, with businesses, and there are several open lots. It's being one of them. There's quite a few businesses that are, ready to go without tenants.
Without
tenants. There's vacant.
Without tenants.
All without Bay Avenue. That have been vacant for several years.
It's always hard when you're trying to create a mixed-use Main Street to balance what you're trying to attract with what's already there. And many times it can be done through a gap analysis, which is a market analysis, which you're planning to do for you, which would target the types of village. That gap analysis would, and it's readily available. You can order it online. It may cost a subscription, but it will actually pick a radius. In this case, you might have to take a elongated radius to find out what everybody's spending their money on. They can actually analyze how much of your money is being spent out of the borough, how much of your money is being spent in the borough, and what are you spending it on. And if there's a gap and it's a use that fits, if we did a similar analysis like that in Pennington up in North Jersey, we found that there was, for example, drugstores, and there was a lack of drugstores. And you could fit a use like that in the box and it fit on the block, on the block configuration. You could target those kinds of retail. But any kind of retail who's trying to come in is going to be looking at what's the spending power around it, and is there enough there to make a business worthwhile before they'll invest in that rent.
There was a study done after Hurricane Sandy by Rutgers University that basically is saying what you're saying. Their estimate was something like along the lines that Highlands was 600 residents short of being self-sufficient. And that was one of the things that they kind of were talking about. That the reason why a lot of businesses are not succeeding is because it lacks the local residential value to make it happen.
I wouldn't be surprised. I did mention that I had this report, and if you'd like, I can leave with you if you wanted to. If anybody was interested in looking at some of this analysis, but in the future, as you start to deal with this, it might be helpful. So if you'd like, I can give you secretary. Thank you. Oh, this is wrong. I'm sorry. I was maybe back to the whole land over. That was not the idea.
That's what I guess. I'm a small business owner myself. One of the first things you look at is what's the population. If you go with business, you go, okay, but how many people are here? And then you start looking from there.
Thank you.
Unless we're going to hear something.
Well, obviously, we've heard some concerns. So I'm just trying to have some conversations with my client, but there's some way to address some of those concerns. When it comes to parking, when it comes to density. So, as I started that conversation, but obviously that would mean probably, it'd be nice to have some sense of, I don't want to adjourn, have to spend a bunch of money to try to do bigger things, and then it's just not going to happen anyway. So, But I understand, there are concerns, and we want to try to address those concerns if possible. I think they are addressable. I think parking is something we can probably figure
I
out.
like the idea of the townhouses there, but I think 2 less units. That's my, I said my own personal, would be better. 6, I don't think is at all, you know, it's a nice fit for that property, you know, people move in there, right? At 8, I think it's too much for that property.
If you do 6 bigger units, and still fill the space in North Park and it's less empty?
No.
No.
I'm looking for a park, I like to talk about parking, because, one of the few things, one of the things about my original was air conditioners. That has since been settled, right? Look at garbage pickup. That's been settled, the garbage trucks are coming, pick up the garbage can, they're gonna go in and out. Parking, what do we want? We allow commercial there. Those 3 there was commercial, there'd be a whole new set of rules for parking. After last meeting, I drove down there, 1 car parked in that whole area. 1. That's it. I can tell all of you, parking is not a problem. Parking is not an issue. There is a municipal parking lot that's right here being used right now, but parking is not an issue. If you want a commercial, if you do these 2 and both have storefronts on the bottom of them, and wherever the cars park, this is what we want commercial, and wherever the cars park. We as a board decide what do we want. Is this what we really want? We were rear parking? The lot is not enough. This isn't, we have all these professionals here, and we'll go back and forth, because I have a lot of this last time. This is the most bang for a buck, obviously that's not our concern. But these professionals all sat down and said, listen, we believe that this is the best thing that we can build. That's what, since we're going to neighbor, not to agree with that. So that's what everybody here came up with. We have to ask ourselves, do we take what we can get at this point? The way it sounds right now, we don't at some point, but this is the second project that everybody here is going to turn down. The one on Mill Street was the other one. This is, we're going nowhere. We'll talk about the redevelopment, we're going to talk about the master plan, I'm going to say how it's ever developing. If you build it, they will come. The gentleman said, he said it himself. It's going to take for us to say, yes, go ahead and build this. I'm not saying this project, build something. People are going to look at it and say, huh, that actually sounds pretty nice. And the next person's going to say, you know what, I'm going to build this over here. This has been vacant for 40 years. This gentleman's going to take his ball and he's going to go home. That's going to be it. We're going to rent it out, somebody else is going to put their construction equipment in it, and that's what we're going to have to deal with. Is that what we really want? Talk about the 19 spaces. We talked about it earlier. They're going to build a curb line on the other side, on the Second Street side. Most likely, they're going to be parking on the side, to include the parking for the American Legion too, probably. And then most likely there'll be an ordinance that says you can't park on one side or the other. That's a lot. The driveway itself is what we talked about. Again, not a concern. The width of the driveway, whether or not you can park in there, whether or not you can turn around there, that's something that the fire marshal's construction department, they're all going to look at. It's not something that we really need to concern ourselves with. We need to concern ourselves with what they're asking for with this. The other departments, as we've seen in the past, they'll go to those other departments and they'll say, yes, you can, and no, you can't, based on that. The master plan, this isn't going to be looked at. We're going to be asked to look at it as an area of redevelopment. Look at all the other properties, right? The property across the street. Look at they have acre, they have a parking lot that they share with the building next door that's empty. 139 Bay Avenue, 141, 143 Bay Avenue, which is on the corner of Moore Street, those properties right there. When we talk about the district itself, look at Ralph the Shoemaker across the street from Ralph's house. They just spent like $560 on that house. That's never going to be a business. Nobody's going to come in and buy a whole block and put businesses up. That's a dream. It's just like it's never in the house, so it's one of those. That's why I was going to get to that. It's not cost of you can't. The average home guy, Shrewsbury and South Street were flooded over. If water breached Veterans Park the other day. That water was there. No business is going to go there. If they fixed Moore Street and Valley Street, they're comfortable working pretty good, but not on the corner over there. Like I said it flooded last week, if you're not gonna fix the other problems, then we're never gonna get this. We have the power right now to effectively change minds. We as this board have the power. There's nobody in this room that knows how to get more than this 100%. No. If we don't start opening up our minds, thinking outside the box, Sandy was 8 years ago. Nothing's coming. Look at 128 Bay Avenue, the old townhouse. It's vacant. Look at Ronaldo's, it's vacant. The property across the street, nothing's getting done over there. It's quality property, 20 years. We have the power right now to say, yes, build this. Within reason, yes. Everybody has great concerns, I get it. But sometimes you gotta overcome those concerns. You gotta say, you know what? 3 parking spots. Really? You go to a parking lot, there's 50 spots, there's 40 spots, something like that. Yeah, there's trailers there, and I get all that. Look at Red Bank. People won't pay for it, they won't. The bike trail somebody spoke about, that's 0 impact. The bike trail has no impact on that whatsoever.
Okay, so we're going to Chief, the first one brought that up. I'm not sure he's like,
Sure, okay.
so,
We're
satisfied with my answer.
Excuse me 1 second, I'll just look at this. Run over that one. That's basically all I have right now. There's a few other things in here, but I was going to wait for a minute. We're talking about it right now. It's almost, for me personally, it's almost frustrating to see all the negativity, boom, boom, boom. I get valid questions. I appreciate valid questions, but the negativity that is already, this gentleman right here with his client, they were up here talking. They're looking at all of us to see who, and then it's comments, to see who do you think's going to vote yes, who do you think's going to vote no? Based on the negativity or the positivity that we're putting out towards the applicant. It's such a shame when we do that, it's a shame that right off the bat, without even, we're just going to deny it. This is the second project again, no restrict money, it's the same exact thing.
You wanted to say something that my attorney told me not to do. I'm not gonna come back with commercial, I'm not gonna do something that I can. I'm not coming back and say, okay, guys, I'll do commercial for you. I mean, I'm not gonna.
I believe it, sir.
I'm not doing that, I'm not trying to, that, we should, that's just fact.
So, I just have to react to that, because I've asked a lot of questions to me that it's not negative in any way.
But I
Us
wasn't.
doing our job
I said,
to create a record to support improvement. That's my view of it.
100%.
I think this is a beautiful development. No, you said there's not a negativity, I
A lot of
just
valid
wanted,
questions.
okay, but I want to make it really clear, I'm not coming at this from a negative point of view. I think it's beautiful. I'd love to see this kind of development on the avenue, but we have to do our job. And from my point of view, a density at that level is very hard to justify. From any point of view, from other projects in town, from the impacts that have to on Bay Avenue. I'm all for residential on Bay Avenue. So I just want to make that really clear. There's nothing negative in my questions. It's, we have to create the record.
Same one you have.
Thank you. I just wanted to make it really clear that
That's why I look at everybody. That's why I look at
We're
everybody.
always going to ask questions because that's our job. Our job is to ask questions. We're asking for a major variance, for a master plan, and for zoning rules, and we have to have a record that justifies providing that variance. That's my view of what our job is.
Agreed. I guess I want to answer that, if we did follow and did a commercial building there, it could be a huge commercial building, which would require a tremendous amount of parking, and would impact that area more, I think, more substantially than a townhouse development.
And with that, I mean, we can't even, we have to look at this project alone. You can't say, you know what, maybe they're gonna build something next door, or maybe they're gonna build something across the street later on. We don't even worry about that point. Worry about what's existing right now. This is another, in my opinion, this is another vacant property. Again, there's parameters here, I understand that, but that's why we have this board, those things that are in place right now don't work. So people have to come to us. We ask for forgiveness, basically, let us do this project of X, Y, and Z. That's why this board exists. So, and again, I appreciate everyone's input, and that's just my 2 cents. There's a lot of valid questions here, a lot of valid things, just from a standpoint of Highlands, stuff. I mean, you can't just keep going this.
Okay, so, the attorney, give me more, witnesses, do I need to go down? I'm sorry, I do that. You do not, okay. I want to make sure. I guess before you sit down, sir, any more questions?
Can I just say something? So, I think we're supposed to be looking at this two prongs. So, will cause no substantial adverse impact on public welfare. You know, this is a vacant lot, it's been vacant for 40 years. The question is, you know, and I actually concur with you. You know, I don't view this as being, I mean, obviously there's some things like parking and garbage, but I think those are things that are not insurmountable, can be addressed. But, you know, if you look at Goodham Bay Avenue, we have a lot of vacant property there. This lot has been vacant for 40 years. And so, you know, I don't view this as having a substantial adverse impact to builds that you're doing. And the other prong, the second prong is no substantial impairment of zone plan and ordinance. Part of the master plan is to encourage redevelopment and rehabilitation. And so obviously building on that is going to encourage rehabilitate that and also, you know, encourage redevelopment. And so I think we need to think about where we want our town to go. You know, we have a lot of, you know, we're underdeveloped here. And I agree, if you have more residents, it'll attract more businesses, and people will want to come. So.
Did you have any questions?
No. Just,
I guess, anybody from the audience have a question? So there's one person.
I have just a couple of comments.
Okay, well, I guess, hold on to the comments, we'll get to that.
Let's still board answer that. Since the site plan issue, we still have to talk about I'm happy things in Ed's letter that we have to address. It's straightforward.
My recollection, and I actually went through that letter with our engineer in a pretty long phone call. I think we pretty much agreed to do just about everything in that letter that was in this letter. A lot of it was more, you know, details on the plan, but and I would just offer that if there are things like specifics of how the garbage is done, removed, placed, whatever, we're willing to work with you, and I would, you know, I would find it hard to believe we wouldn't be able to come up with something that's going to satisfy this person if a resolution was worded in a way that's needed.
That's what I was.
I don't think the garbage thing is. I don't think we that's going to be a problem. There, I can put the garbage very much.
Yeah, we could talk back down on it, and people just leave it up there, whether they leave it for the front door or the garage door.
Yeah. Kind of leave on day other or not. Well, the fact of the matter is, the garbage will be after we have the garbage. And everybody thinks they'll be after because
The nature of people is that they're not going to want to walk when we got to the end of the street. Let's cut to the chase. They don't want to leave it in front of their door.
So, I really think there's something that needs to address the applicant.
Before we even got that, I was gonna ask if you wanted to weigh in on anything.
Well, I guess, you had a question?
Yeah, I was curious if in your planning, to evaluate, having to warranty their units and would that be started for a specific reason? I think there's some concerns about, you know, is it cramming 8 units into this property? And curious as to if people will evaluate it.
I can certainly, you can have some more testimony about that, but my belief and understanding is this is what was financially viable. This is what we could propose, and we felt, even though, yes, we need variances on certain things, it's certainly a very livable space. It's a place where people would like to live, I think, and like to make this their home. Parking, I do think, spend a fair amount of time on that, and I agree that, at least right now, you may have a problem 5-10 years from now, but right now, that's curve along Bay Avenue and places nearby provide that. And I know the concern about the back-to-back underneath, but that is also available. So I think the feeling was this is something that is viable financially. We talked about the unique nature of the 3 sides, and I think from my, the thing that I've kind of tracked about when we first looked at, just the presentation that we made on all this urban corridor in this town that everybody drives by. It's astonishing. If I get a house in 6 months, I come through and wow, that's nice. That looks like a nice place to live. I would mind living there. So that, I think, was the sense of why these other things maybe aren't completely abiding with requirements of the ordinance, but overall, it seems like it really did further the purpose of the zone plan.
I think it might actually change some of the surrounding buildings. It'll place up a little bit, you know, we can see.
It shows hope.
It does.
I think it's a great idea, I really do. But like I said, if I didn't ask about the parking, I wouldn't be doing what people are doing. I think it's a great idea, we need something there.
Ed, do you have any concerns?
I just gave them a letter again, I'm not really concerned by anything, there's a number of requests I made, you know, to them to address certain things in the plans. I think the traffic testimony here tonight was what I would expect it to be based on, you know, accepted industry standards. Given the fact that the frontages are available, Bay Avenue, a county road right there. If the traffic on a county road will be put. So that's not an ideal situation, we're very close to that. Stormwater, I'm not concerned about, they can address that relatively easily. But the one thing I would call hearing was the homeowners association, and they have homeowners association. How do you maintain the road? So like we talked about that last time, those are records.
It'll be up to the owner, not to
They don't,
and you would also, for the garbage, would have problem contacting the garbage company too.
I guess, I'm not sure.
So, because I know, I live in a townhouse, and we had you know, the town, or the town things, we still have to make arrangements, they have to come on private property to pick up the garbage. So, I would assume it would probably be the same as you, but I really don't know.
But that's kind of,
Whatever it is, it is.
yeah. So we'll those lines, that's all part of
Yeah,
federal maintenance each year.
so that would be on, whoever the owner of the property is. Yeah, that's not. Yeah, it's not on that, it's not gonna be on you. You would have to ask the town how the garbage works and all that stuff.
Is there anything else for that?
And I think that's, nothing on the record to do.
Any more questions from the board?
You have the comments one.
Okay, any questions, any more questions from the audience? It's, question period. Okay.
My question point out, I live at 9 Center Street. I'm sorry, can you answer?
I'm sorry.
Michael Boyle, G-O-I-O-N-E, 9 Center Street. You're the one second, sorry, she just answered. Oh.
Can you state that again? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Michael Boyone, G-O-I-O-N-E. So first of all, I just want to say I've only lived in the area about a year and a half, so take my perspective as someone new to the area, not someone who's been here all my life, and sometimes a fresh set of eyes, maybe can lend a little thought to this. I made some notes, and then I listened, and some of my notes changed as I listened, but one of my first concerns is the building is so big, it fills virtually the entire property, and that people who live there have nowhere to go but out their door. There's absolutely no green area anywhere. And the fact that it's going to be a 3-bedroom, there clearly will be families and all there. So I just don't understand why you have to build property so full. And in comparison, you mentioned the condos on Center Street. They're 2-bedroom condos, not 3. So most everyone that lives there, if not all, don't have families. And there is greenery all around, and people have a back deck to socialize and grill their chicken on and all that kind of stuff. So there's virtually no living area for these people except what's inside. Now the CBD, this whole thing is kind of new to me since I haven't been here, but I understand what you said about being very linear, but it seems like, if anything, the central business district area should be centered down where this property is, because virtually that whole linear area is, I don't know about mostly, but certainly a lot of residential, which is with the flood zone issues, is never going to be torn down and rebuilt. So I do understand that something's better than nothing, and that was a good point. But when you turn this into residential, you virtually eliminate this of ever becoming commercial, and you're not going to really ever develop a actual central business district by doing that. Compared to townhouses, now, I mean, just one little comment. I was reading the 2009 master plan reexamination that says, the second bullet point is strive to increase the percentage of owner-occupied housing in the borough. Well, this does just the opposite of that. This will not be owner-occupied. So it kind of goes directly against one of the bullet points of your master plan. So I guess my two biggest concerns are you're trying to stuff, this massive structure with virtually no green area around it into the property. And again, I don't know if this applies because you do have to take one thing at a time, but once you give this approval, you're basically telling everyone that the central business district can be just turned into whatever you want it to be because this is clearly 100% not central business. So that's a concern. I don't know if that's the board's concern or not, but it sure seems like it should be. Mr. Baxter had mentioned, that my concern is similar to this question about abandoning the CBD zone plan, and maybe you are effectively rezoning the area. And then the planning expert, sorry, I know your name, did a really great job. I mean, really convinced me a lot of other questions I had and answered them, but you said that we need more residents of Bay Avenue, and from living here only a year and a half, I think there's plenty of residents here. I think we need better business and better business frontage. We get a lot of visitors already, and so I don't know if I totally agree with that. And then parking shouldn't be a big issue, and I'm not trying to make it even a bigger issue, but I don't agree that parking is not an issue because if you come by our area any day of the week, Lucky Lobster employees take up the entire area and their trucks take everything else up. So parking is an issue. Anyway, again, it's more comments. I don't envy you all because it's a tough decision because I hate to see a vacant lot with a fence around it. At the same time, I don't know if that's the right piece of structure to go in there. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing there's nobody else in the audience, I guess, yeah, did it work? No, I didn't work.
So,
I guess the public portion is closed. If you ever go to board, want to put an ad? So I guess looking for board members and any comments.
Well, I'm happy to, reiterate my feelings, which is, I do believe that a move towards more residential on Bay Avenue is not a bad fit for the town. I think we've talked multiple times at board level about the fact that businesses don't want to build on the ground level. And we saw that with a lot across the street, the triangular lot, where there was the plan that came in front of us to give us kind of under the board. And so you parking underneath and raise retail, and it just didn't make any sense. So basically, some people just didn't have access. So we've seen that as a problem. But I do have a real problem with the density of the proposed projects. I just don't know how to justify 19.5 units per acre. It will have a very significant visual impact on that part of town, which for a lot of it will be positive to get rid of the lot with the fencing. I definitely think that this is a much obviously much more significant positive improvement, but I really have a problem with that. And I also have a problem with the complete lack of outdoor space, as I mentioned earlier as well. There's generally people can sit on a chair on either side of their front door, but there's not even a gathering place for people to have an afternoon meal or have a barbecue. Like, there's not even a place for people to have a barbecue grill. That just feels so incredibly.
On the third floor.
I agree with
Added
everything you said.
Yeah.
Especially the gentleman here. I think what we're seeing is, I see it 100% on my watch, is
for some people, when I don't change it, like I said, about Village Street, but there's people who came from other places where you rented apartments, and didn't have anything. So, for you, you will think the same exact thing, for my girl, wherever that extends, somebody who's rent one of these, they're very louder.
But there's also a part of the outdoor space. So it's not just that we're allowed to density 9.5, also doing a complete pass that we voted for this on required outdoor space, on lot coverage, on side yard setbacks, on multiple things that we hold other builders more stringently.
And like the gentleman said, getting away from the idea of this at the business district. Which we will essentially change that. With that 100%.
When we talked at the city level and at school level about, how they're feeling on the way sports surrounding the residential diagonal, this goes, very consistent with our committee conversations and school conversations, but again, for me, the complete lack of outdoor space and the density, as opposed to changing the use, which I actually support, but the density on picnics.
That is supported with less dense.
I would support it if it's less dense and there was actually outdoor space.
Right?
Or not, I mean, the gentleman seems to suggest we would have less students in the exact same footprint.
Less dense.
I think you're suggesting the same size building, there's less students in the building. So I'd like to see less density from a unit point of view and from a structure point. Thank you.
Okay, something to keep in mind too, if we did go with the central business district concept, it would be apartments we'd be dealing with. And they would have probably no balcony, or maybe a very small balcony. They certainly would have any outdoor access whatsoever, because we know chances are no common greenery.
But they wouldn't need a variance.
But they wouldn't, it was a business.
Right. It's
Right.
residential, they wouldn't be asking us for this.
I guess the point is, if the application we put forward didn't meet the variance, they wouldn't check those boxes that we're checking out. But I guess you're bringing them now, outdoor space. We wouldn't even worry about that. It wouldn't be something you
They wouldn't be in
consider.
front of the board.
What's that?
They would not, they wouldn't be in front of the board.
Well, that's true.
In this zone, though, isn't it? Why would you order the retail on the ground floor and you have additional use for residential on the second and maybe third floor?
True, yeah,
So there wouldn't be, I don't think, a lot of outdoor space in that.
That's my point. That's what I'm trying to make. If we went to what Mexico said, we wouldn't even be able to even address that side. We would go to
Commercial units, and you get up some of that, the benefit of having commercial units, walkability and having commercial and places to purchase things or buy now or recreation. Is a benefit overall to the community. And, that might outweigh some of the negatives that you might have on denser residential on specific properties. But, I think as a board, you would have to be guided by master plan and see how that fits into the community overall. This particular application does, which actually fully compare the goals of the master plan, compare the vulnerability of the downtown, and, so that's my thesis.
Seems like part of the this, it's not so much this application as much as our master plan has a bit of an identity crisis happening.
100%.
So,
It's the rubber stamp.
so what is, I read the 2016, the examination amendments, it was 120 pages, dry, sometimes it's 63 days. But
Years later, there you are.
it doesn't buy a lot of it, yet it's explored, or are we talking about what's the progress here? So I have a lot of concerns about the density, but I'm very excited about the idea of something being built on that lot.
2.5 kilowatts is that. Go down my water, and we got 2 1 across from each other.
I guess something else that's important to point out is, we talked about it briefly today with the mayor. It's not getting looked at for a redevelopment. Because what we have going on with our master plan is obviously not working. Therefore, it's one of the changes. So therefore, right, exactly, if it was working, then we would have a need to bring in professional planners and look at a regeneration of that whole thing. They're all so redundant. And go about all sort of the same way, please, build, and please, build.
Yeah.
We encourage you to do it, and
Jim, I wondering what it is, I said, Jim, I wish I could close my eyes and don't know.
So what is it, I think it's a system.
no, 20 plus years.
And we gave them approval for the restaurant down below and
But we did
everything
it,
stuff on top.
and we designed all that.
We have to ask ourselves, too, we're to agree, all these other big storefronts. Why? How long, right, why, but why? I mean, it's the combination. We know the answer, we have that answer, and some people can speculate, but you have to think about that. Why? Because it's not working. It's just,
Say again, if it was working, we would be investigating redevelopment.
we have liquor licenses that aren't being used, and, I mean, that's crazy in itself. You know, redevelopment, subject process, hearings, input, all these things to be formed into a plan that will implement it. And, you know, we don't know what the form of redevelopment will take. But it may take one where, people are forced to do something with their properties, and if they're not allowed to even create this for 10, 15, 20, 40 years.
I don't know how you enforce that. All right, put Starbucks here.
Could be a combination, we don't know what form the redevelopment will take. So.
There's a lot of
I'm thinking in terms of the cooperative motion, and my sense is, the motion to approve the plan is already paid. So it will fail, it may pass for the goods by vote. And if another hand, if it was modified to, reduce the number of units, is just the likelihood to get 5 or 6 of them. That's just my observation. Comments to the board. So I just think we have to be aware. The majority board wants this residential project that is not right. So let's offer the motion to approve the way it is when I don't know. Not really the comments the board has.
However, we saw it recently, the gentleman in our Jeep, doesn't it? Right, for Jeep, he proposed 3 houses over here, so if I can't build 3, I'm not building that. He hasn't built that, that's right. We thought he was gonna come back and say, you know what, when you build 2, I'll just do it 2, he hasn't built that. So,
what's there is,
right, that's what we're dealing with. I'm talking about, I'm just pointing, no, 100%, yeah, let's keep it saying.
And you may not get what you want.
that's great, the application,
That's my observation.
just on 2 last observations. One being, I do think that the statutory scheme and the criteria that, do allow for the use variance statutes there, so that you can bring variances outside. So, and I think there's enough, all the things we talk about are enough to support legally the grant of the variance. The second thing I would just say is that the conditions that bring us to this point are going to drive whatever happens with the redevelopment plan or whatever. It's not going to stay the same. It's what is happening now isn't working, and I think those new criteria are not going to be tougher than what is in existence now. I think it's going to encourage development. And
How long do you say you were on?
I was, listen, I'm kidding you. I bought that property in 2006. Because I really love the town. and I grew up in Red Bank, and then went to the beach and around Long Island, and I was so excited and hopeful. And a couple of major storms, 7 feet of water, made that a little bit of a difficult journey, but I did have a chance to observe, and I still do believe that your town in that corner has an incredible amount of potential, but I really think that getting those couple anchor spots so that when those folks come in and they see, I mean, this is nice. I'm in his building in Red Bank. Took a washing-off building, and I have a nice professional office. That's how he does things. He lives a mile from you. He's right on 36. He's not some fly-by-night developer. He does nice work. This is going to be a nice building. I plan to work place where I'm in Red Bank and take a look at the work. It's a beautiful building that's happening. I think I'm at some feeling that's coming in for him and what he's done. You're not going to be disappointed. Yes, you're right. It's not, you can't make it work with more greenery. You'd love to have more space outside, but there's a whole lot of people. You're still going to have a great living experience, even though you may not have all those things. I think this would be a nice living experience to live there, and I think we would add to it as well. So, with that, I guess we can just ask for the motion.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, make a motion to approve it with the stipulation that the new drawings give Mr. Herman, with regards to the air conditioning units, that's the only thing that we had, that we thought that was slightly different. But that's what I overthink. I do tend to believe that a project like this would spur growth in that area. Imagine our building, street building. I don't expect that someone's going to do something like that sooner rather than later. The fact was across the street, down the street. Things like this get people excited. They don't take that gamble come to step, do something. Part of your motion has moved that Apple would comply with the comments in the engineer's letter.
Yes.
And so the parking, this is a waiver, part of your motion.
Yes. What was asked? 3 points. The spaces that we were asking for? 3. 16 and 19. Which is what according to the expectation. Basically, it's 3 off-site.
Are there further provision that approved start the construction as soon as possible? Is your point the wall for the garage inside the members stuff like that? So it wouldn't, it's a drawing, so it's like that, and that's stay open the way it's shown. That way we're,
Well, that's the new plans presented. Or just
now, if we're granting the 3 spots, then in the case of the wall, that's relevant at that point. So don't mention it. I would say don't mention it. It said the space doesn't count. Okay. I would recommend that they approve the 3 spaces, so therefore.
That's a problem. Also off the road. That's a problem.
We have 6.
There's last meeting.
There's only 6 that can vote tonight.
Now, I would request that we adjourn and give board member an opportunity. There's also 3 board members that were here for the first one that will not be a strike. Yeah. So they may be here. Lionel Frank was here. What's the report?
LaRusso. Three.
Yes. I think it was at least 2.
we'll hear it first. Well, they may not decide to listen to it. They haven't heard this whole discussion, so, you know, it's idle to it. They were full, 17 votes. These 17 votes was due to him. Currently not having heard that testimony. In fact, next month, we could have 7 voters if someone else listened. Someone else's vote that would replace. Yes, we found out national. Only a 7 vote. So, doesn't affect the board of trustees, it's just putting this current number.
Just give us 5, right? So I'm trying to think if there's some other.
Only 7 can vote.
So at this point, I would draw a motion.
Well, second, I'm getting. Let me ask you this, we're done with the motion? I think so. Because if we do it, only just stop now. So the motion's on the table, waiting for a second. And then you'll listen to the table for silence after it's. And then come back, and then assuming none of the people there for the first night, the person will take tonight, and all 7 of you show up again, and it's then this goes to be voted. And that's the way it works out. If it turns out that one of the other members listens to the tape of the night, that member will be bumped. It's hesitant. And it's true of the young folks who just understand that I'm cynical. I don't think that the only other alternative is to do the motion. You only have 6 voters. Do it tonight. I certainly understand.
Yeah, I'm trying not to. My thought would be that you've reached the one where there's a motion on the floor. There's one person that needs to go through the transcript. To me, it should be who is eligible to vote at the time of the motion is made, so that bringing in additional people. So I think we're fine with adjourning, but I think we'd like to just, so this is the group that's voting because they're here for the motion, rather than opening it up to.
Well, why don't we go this way?
Is there a second?
I'll second it. Okay.
So now that's it. So no,
we say that. Whatever it is. I don't know how many hours.
Not voting.
Same the table. Yes, I think they'd be here first and vote on it. Right.
Apologies, I lost my voting on, I have that to be voted on. So, sorry about that.
In that case, we would, somebody move to adjourn the hearing, Zoom next month for the purpose of, unless it's 4 months time, and vote. Direct whole process to not be honest.
Who made that?
Motion to adjourn, and then, adjourn the meeting, the board will comment on motion if they want to.
So who made the motion? Okay. Chairman Knopf?
Yes.
Chief Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Kutosh?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
I missed what was on
We're just voting to carry it from that. So now that's on the motion. No, you want to start again.
What we do is just
Okay,
yes.
Ms. Tierney?
Yes.
Ms. Pendleton?
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, I guess, how should we handle the next meeting? I guess, we'll put them on first. Put them on first. For December. Not bringing them, yeah, which is probably just do that stuff.
Well, the hearing's closed.
Yeah.
You don't have to anyway.
Well, I guess we're done with the festival, yes. We can still go back on it. I can come back in.
But you don't even have time.
I guess just go for the notice involved,
No.
go for the testimony involved, public discussion closed. Just it's a matter of, a roll call or vote.
Appreciate it. And then,
Okay, I guess, looking for a motion to adjourn. You're all in favor? Aye. Okay, motion passes.